Tātou. Tanui te mihi ki a koutou I tai mai nei ki te tautoko te kaupapa o tēnei rangi, tēnei te mihi nau mai hara mai. He karakia timatanga o tēnei huihuinga. Me ino I tātou, e te atua anai mātou e ponunga. E ino nei ki a koe, e tata mai koe ki wainga nui tēnei o tō tātou huihuinga. Hei a whina, hei a rataki I a mātou I roto I tēnei o tō tātou kaupapa. Tiaki pai rātou mā, kāre taia tīnana I roto I tēnei hui. Nō reira e te atua kaha rawa, kuihu karaiti hoki, tō mātou ariki, āmeni.
Amen.
Mene, and thank you, Albie, for opening our session this morning. I want to welcome all of the attendees and all of our Ngā Rākau Takitaki whānau, as well as our wider Bioheritage National Science Challenge whānau to today's Kauriland Summit. Fortunately, we planned this to be online, probably very timely given Wellington's partial lockdown. And I think that's a sign of our times, and it's actually really reflective of how this program began, which was with a hiss and a roar and then COVID hit. So it's really exciting for us to welcome everyone here to our inaugural Kauriland Summit, and I do mean inaugural. We do plan on doing this for a number of years, but we're going to kick straight into it. What I'm going to do is a wee bit of housekeeping, even though we're online. I'm assuming that you're all safe in your own whare or workplaces, that you know what your housekeeping is. But online, I just want to remind our panelists, and we have a large swag of panelists, all of our NRT co-leads and more, to keep your cameras off and your mics muted unless it's your turn to present. Every time you flick your camera on, the world sees you. So just remember, cameras off, mics muted until we call you forward to present. For everyone else, for our attendees and our participants, and I can see that the room is filling up, that there is about, I think, 50 on already or so. Welcome, no mai haere mai, ki te hui hui nei, ki te zui nei. And what I want to let you know is that we have a number of functions here for you to use. Of course, there is the usual questions session and section of the webinar software. There's also the chat room where you can send messages to people, and of course there's a poll function as well. So every now and then you may see a question pop up. We ask you to feedback if you can. We would really appreciate it. The questions are nothing onerous. It's just, what do you think of this theme? Are you on our newsletter? Do you receive our newsletter, for example? So please keep an eye out for those polls as well. I'm going to kick us into it, and we're going to get moving with the very first session, which focuses on our PO, our cross-cutting program, before I hand over to Daniel to lead Impact 1. So as you know, many of you know, the biological heritage is fortunate to be leading the program known as Ngā Rākau Takitaki, Saving Our Iconic Trees. Its development, the development of Ngā Rākau Takitaki, followed an announcement of a new investment into Kauri dieback and Murua, specifically with the focus being to accelerate work that had already been done by government agencies, councils, research providers, Māori and interested groups. As you all know, because you're here, Kauri dieback is threatening Aotearoa New Zealand's treasured kauri with extinction, and Murua is threatening many iconic native species as well as plants important to primary industries. More knowledge is urgently needed to underpin our approaches and to develop tools to fight these two pathogens. The name Ngā Rākau Takitaki reflects the historical connections Māori and other New Zealanders have with our kauri and our mutaisi trees. Takitaki in particular refers to the permanence of that relationship. So this program aims to protect and restore that relationship and that connection. That is why it's so important to many of us, and why so many of us, including everyone online today, is passionate about Ngā Rākau Takitaki, and in particular saving our ngahere for the next generation. And that's probably a really nice segue into the first session, which is examining our cross-theme PO, Te Whakahononga. And so what I want to do in a minute is introduce the team, or hand over to them to introduce themselves, and then they will lead us through a presentation before we open up for questions. So as I said, Te Whakahononga is a cross-cutting approach to working with mana whenua throughout the 7 themes of Ngā Rākau Takitaki. This session, as I said, will open with a PowerPoint, and then we will go to Q&A. Again, reminder that the functions you'll need for this session are the questions and the chat rooms. Please keep an eye out for any poll questions that pop up, and a reminder for those not in Te Whakahononga to keep your cameras and your microphones off. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Waitangi Wood, Dave Milner, Julian Cheetham, Albie Marsh and Tracy Godfrey to introduce themselves. Could I start by asking perhaps you, Albie, seeing as I know your camera, or Julian, is working, a mic, to start by introducing yourselves. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora tātou, ko Julian Cheetham tōku ingoa no whangareia hau. I'm the co-lead on the host pathogen and environment theme of Ngā Rākau Takitaki, and also part of this group of Māori co-leads that has been developing the Te Whakahononga approach. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, ko Albie Marsh tōku ingoa. I work at Plant and Food Research. I'm a researcher there. Also co-lead for Theme 7, Conservation Restoration, and I'm based in Palmerston North. Kia ora.
Morena koutou, ko Dave Milner taku ingoa, ko Patuhara ki te hapu. I'm a co-lead for the Control, Protect, Cure theme, and also a part of the Te Whakahononga Māori co-leads team. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tracy Godfrey tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Awa ki Rangitaiki ahau. I'm the project coordinator for Te Whakahononga. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Waitangi, are you there to introduce yourself as well?
Kia ora koutou, ko Waitangi Wood tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Rua ki Whangaroa. I am on integrated surveillance within Anderson and Audrey Lustig, and working on this mahi with Te Whakahononga. Kia ora.
Kia ora whānau. So what we're going to do now is transition into a PowerPoint that this team are going to run us through before we open to Q&A. So Anna, would you mind putting the PowerPoint up, and I'll hand over to Te Whakahononga team to run us through the PowerPoint before we go to questions. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora koutou. I'll start the conversation. So as Miles described, Ngā Rākau Takitaki is made up of 7 themes, and within these themes there are 5 themes that have looked at integrating the research and as a way to engage effectively with Māori and to progress and develop research and science that's being led in Ngā Rākau Takitaki. So the reason for this approach was so that we could focus on mātauranga Māori centric and kaupapa Māori research, and embedded in this work that we're doing to address plant pathogens, kauri dieback, and also to empower kaitiaki to take action. The work also looks at the ways communities and mana whenua engaged and mobilised to participate within the mahi, and it looks at addressing the research across the different themes, and elevating mana whenua into the science and research space. So Māori co-leads have developed Te Whakahononga. It's a mana whenua integrated research plan to ensure that working relationships established through research on myrtle rust and kauri dieback recognise the tiriti o Waitangi and the rights and responsibilities of kaitiaki and rangatira as set out in Y262, the Statement of Claim, and that these are part of the Ngā Rākau Takitaki's commitments. So connected to the science, we've identified that mana whenua want to work within the research and through in situ investigation and observations, are able to discuss the ways that their intimacy with taonga can also be interfaced with the work that sits within the research and science space. We recognised from the outset that mana whenua needed to be engaged in the work, and that by having access to existing and emergent research information and data, that they're able to test and apply their own mātauranga and mōhio and determine mana whenua centric solutions to support the resilience of their taonga, determining their own solutions and approaches, and supporting the body of knowledge that we are assured will be advanced by this mahi. So the next slide, please. So one of the benefits of this program, this approach, is that we're looking at direct engagement between mana whenua and researchers and scientists, so nobody in the middle. It also provides an opportunity for mana whenua to have full disclosure of the science researchers and the people who are working within their area, sort of on-site regions, but also it gives them the opportunity to know the scientists and researchers that are providing the answers and solutions, and responding to the problem we have with Kauri dieback and mineral rust. It is a way of recognising cultural licence, because scientists and researchers recognise the provenance of the information and data, but also the taonga that they're working with. And mana whenua engaged early and able to contribute to the research development, and as a result, are able to contribute to the research development. There's an holding, so multiple ways. One of those ways is around cultural capability and capacity, and contributing to the capacity of Māori to understand how science and research affect, and the decisions being made from science and research affect their work, and the decisions that are being made on the ground. And of course, it responds to Treaty and Y262. Next slide, please. Jules, do you want to talk to this?
Kia ora. So this slide basically just addresses the layers that the approach flows down through. So at the top you see the 5 themes that are involved in the Te Whakahononga Po: risk assessment and ecosystem impacts, integrated surveillance, the tools, control, protect, cure, host pathogen and environment, and conservation and restoration. So as part of that, all of those themes have this platform that enables their scientists and researchers to mahitahi with mana whenua through what we call biodiversity management areas, or BMAs, which are attached to rohe. And that allows that conversation and engagement to occur with individual research areas and projects under those themes. The second layer is what I sort of tend to refer to as bespoke mātauranga Māori projects or research areas. So the Māori co-leads have worked on with researchers and looking at the capacity and mahi that's already been occurring in various rohe, have developed up some concepts for sort of bespoke mātauranga Māori research, which is he tohu o te maramataka, te mauri o te ngahere, the cultural impact assessment program, and he taio. So these are looking at sort of cultural health indicators. These sit alongside the science approaches that are coming through the themes and align really well with those. So you might have, for example, the Cody dieback epidemiology project from host pathogen and environment, which you'll hear about later, that involves observation and monitoring of a whole variety of environmental factors, and sitting alongside that will be the opportunity for mana whenua to develop their own tohu related to their own maramataka and their own unique individual understandings of the ngahere. So that is how they're intended to work together. The Mātauranga Māori projects are standalone, but they can be implemented and carried out alongside the research that's happening under the research areas of the different themes, for example. So there's a lot of ability for individual mana whenua to develop those research areas up in accordance with their own kaitiakitanga, their own research, their own mahi that's already underway in the ngahere, for example. And then how that gets rolled out is through these 16 biodiversity management areas, or BMAs, linked to a mana whenua. The way that is going to work is that there will be a tangata kōkiri, which is a individual that's a linker or a connector, and also a safeguarder, almost like a liaison of mana whenua. And then each mana whenua group has their own project lead and 2 kaitiaki that's all resourced through these five themes. And together, in a collaborative way, they'll be developing annual work plans that based on research area schedules. So the research area schedules have been populated by the themes, the theme co-leads, and we'll have a look at what that might look like in a minute. But every mana whenua group will have their own annual work plan, which is based on the research area schedules that either like the conservation and restoration theme or the tools theme have projects that they would like to undertake in your rohe. Then you as mana whenua can decide what level of engagement or involvement that you want to have. If there's part of that theme that you're really keen to develop up into your research area schedules, into your annual work plan, then that can occur. If there are certain parts of the research that you don't sit well with you, or you don't have the capacity to undertake those types of issues, then you can exclude those. So there's a high level of control for mana whenua that we perhaps haven't seen very much in the past in the science space.
Kia ora.
Do you want to add anything, anybody?
I think just to wrap that up, so the idea around this approach is to elevate mana whenua into the research and science space. In ngā rākau takitaki, there are multiple research and science projects that require direct engagement with Māori, and so instead of putting Māori in a position and researchers in a position where they would be spending a lot of time developing the engagement, having the engagement before being able to take on go forward with their research or science. This approach allows us to front foot all of that activity and to engage directly earlier, and in a way that allows Māori to be part of the research as the research progresses. The benefit of that is that Mātauranga Māori at the beginning is balanced, where Mātauranga Māori is being informed by science and research because Māori don't have intimacy with the ngangara. Scientists and researchers do, so the pathogens, but they do have intimacy with the environment and the ecosystems that those pathogens are affecting. And so if they're engaged earlier, our premise is that having more knowledge and having more engagement between science and Western knowledge holders and Indigenous knowledge holders, that that will be able to evolve better outcomes for both, and that we will see a shift where Indigenous knowledge takes a lead. And that's what we're hoping to demonstrate with this approach. There are 3 parts to the approach, as Jules discussed. There is an initial research area schedule, which is a templated document that researchers and scientists complete, that's then provided to mana whenua to determine whether or not they want to progress that science or research, or to get some clarity around it. If the I just noticed that something else has come up on the screen, so I'm assuming that we're getting, is there, how are we getting bumped? So if the once that's done, there's a face-to-face meeting where Tracy Godfrey works with mana whenua to work through the different components that inform their work plan, and also their contracts and a cultural authority agreement, and then a cultural authority agreement is finalised with the program. And so that's how the Te Whakahononga approach works. We just had 2 slides, which I'll do real quickly, but I noticed that there's other slides up on the screen. Mal.
Just keep talking and we'll get those down. Thanks. Can you see what you got?
So we basically wanted just to show you really quickly, briefly, an image of what a Te Whakahononga research, a group of research projects that mana whenua may be engaged to one BMA, to give you a sense of how challenging that might be for researchers and scientists all going to engage with the same Māori in the same place, and how overwhelming it would be for Māori in terms of how many researchers and scientists that would want that they would be confronted with, if I could use that term. And so if I could show that, that would be great. But otherwise, and then the next slide we've got is basically to show you where the mana whenua in situ investigations would occur, and the elements that sit within the research and science programs that Māori will contribute to in terms of the work that they're contracted and progressing along with scientists for the next 2 years.
Right.
Thanks, Whakahou. I think one of the key things around Te Whakahononga and NRT is historically the traditional sort of approach has been for research to be applied to mana whenua areas without mana whenua even being aware of or involved. And so what we're trying to do is front foot that and actually make sure that first and foremost mana whenua and the BMAs are aware of what is coming into their rohe, and to be able to get in early and introduce research to mana whenua to see if they're actually acceptable for that or not, or approve of that or not. And so this Te Whakahononga engagement PO is really just front footing that, introducing science to mana whenua, seeing if mana whenua are comfortable to support with their own local knowledge or not, and to see what research is available, and just coordinate it a lot more easier and formalise that process as well. So I think hopefully if we get the next 2 slides up, there'll be a good example to sort of explain what that looks like. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. I might just ask a couple of questions while we sort out the teething problems around those slides, if that's okay, and that might help get us into a space where we might get a million other questions, I'm sure. So I have a question. I'm hoping this doesn't cut across what you're going to tell us in your next slides, and that is that all of you here on the screen in Waitangi are working on the ground with your hapu, with your iwi, with your whānau. So how is it, I think you're starting to talk about this just now, how is this approach different to what you typically experience as mana whenua trying to work with or engage with researchers?
I'll go so there's two parts to that conversation. The first one is when I'm engaging with whānau hapu at home, I'm engaging as hapu. In this conversation here, we've elevated out of, well, when I say elevated, I don't mean elevated higher. I mean that we're providing a perspective where we're supporting researchers and scientists to work directly with those mana whenua of those BMAs. And the difference is that mana whenua are engaged first, early. They have full disclosure of all the science and research, whereas at home they are engaged in the program as it goes. When information or research information or science is learnt about the ngangara or about the ecosystems that are existing or the tools that are being created, because I'm part of this program with Te Whakahononga, I would be engaged. I would know that at the same time that scientists and researchers and other agencies would know. Whereas at home on the ground, often or not, I wouldn't know much of that stuff until much later in the piece. So someone else may have been contacted or I may have been contacted. The level of information or data or sharing to me would be limited to the availability or the appetite of the researcher or the scientist to share that with me. I wouldn't be part of much of the development. There would be no resourcing, and if there was, it would be quite piecemeal because the resourcing is already allocated before the scientist across a project and committed across a project before they come and see Māori. So that's my view on that one.
Anyone else? Or?
Yeah, I think most people will have had experiences where you sort of get a phone call or an email from somebody saying that they'll be in your rohe the following week or within the next 3 days or something like that. And, you know, you can, if you're lucky, you get invited to come out and accompany them to see whatever research they're doing. And in the past, we've, you know, been given copies of the article or the research, again, if we specifically request that. So yeah, that's, I'm not saying that that's universal, but I think it probably is a pretty common experience for a lot of mana whenua. I think people are trying. I think, you know, so science and research institutes do want to do better. They just don't necessarily have the tools themselves to do better. So that's, I think that comes back to what Waitangi was just saying, that this is providing a straightforward pathway for scientists and researchers as well to know who to consult and or engage with, and how and what kind of information people hapu iwi kai Tiaki are wanting or needing to be able to make informed decisions and engage to the level that they would like to do. So
thanks, Charles. Albie, you were going to add to that?
Was I? Kia ora. Not really. Yeah, I suppose what we needed to look at was the whole program of ngā rākau takitaki, and we have 5 themes signed up to Te Whakahononga. What we didn't want to see is 5 themes approaching the same 5 rohe and wanting to work with them. So this was about bringing coordination to that approach, so that it was one approach that we made to a mana whenua group that we were wanting to work with, and then designing a work plan around the 5 themes that had signed up to the program. So rather than being bombarded by individuals wanting to work with them, this was more about bringing all 5 themes wanting to work with one individual rohe and coordinating the work plan that enabled that to happen in a cohesive manner. So it made it a lot easier for mana whenua to plan out the work program that's aligned to the different themes that they were doing work for. So if you understood that, then you're a genius.
So if I can, so just maybe support that genius. So this is what you have now is an example of 17 of the 30-something research proposals that sit within ngā rākau takitaki that require engagement with mana whenua. So there's 17 of them. So So there are various stages of engagement. So we're saying that instead of coming in later, or if you have to go and pick taonga or seed, instead of going at that stage, that actually these 17 need to engage at the outset of their research. And we want to acknowledge the co-leads, other co-leads, and other and the NRT leadership group were actually supporting and enabling this to happen, because this wouldn't have gone through if we didn't have supported and prioritisation of mana whenua engagement and appropriate cultural arrangements in place before the research. So this slide here is an example of all the research. And so what we did was we determined from that research, and this work this is advised through the research area schedules. And so if you go to the next slide, which is our last slide, and then you can click off, Anna. And this is basically what comes out of the work. So there's cultural authority arrangements, there's work in situ, there's investigations, there's working around developing up frameworks and ways to assess impact. There are monitoring and surveillance, there's taonga collection, there's development of mātauranga Māori solutions, there's testing, checking for cultural license. So a whole gamut of things that sit within that research that actually Māori are doing and can do. And so what we're doing with the Whakahononga approach is we've pulled those out, found where the alignment is within the research and science over the next year or so, and have mana whenua working directly with the researchers and scientists. The difference between that approach and an approach where, as Julian says, someone comes and just phones you, or you might get a publication, or you may be engaged at the end point when there's a path that the researcher requires, is substantial. It's a substantial difference. It's a game changer. That if this is possibly adopted across the research and science space, it means it'll alleviate a number of things. It'll alleviate cultural license, for the issues around cultural license, and this conversation that we don't know which Māori to talk to, because you'll have Māori directly working and establishing strong strategic trust relationships with scientists and researchers for future research and science projects and initiatives. I hope that answered the question. Kia ora.
Oh, yeah, it did. And I guess that probably leads into another question I had, which is on this slide, and that was that we hear a lot about cultural authority agreements in the Bioheritage Challenge. So could you tell us a wee bit about what they are and why they're so important?
Kia ora. Okay, I'll start and then we can get a... No. Get one toy and then go back out. One toy. Sorry, I'm in a playroom. One toy.
Why does someone else want to, Julianne, want to take that question? Why are the cultural authority agreements so important? They're not standard. You don't see those as standard across other research programs or organisations, although they're more common now, aren't they?
The ones that are being developed up for this approach are based on a project that came out of the Cody Dieback program, and that was called the Healthy Trees, Healthy Futures project, and that was developed up with a number of us who were on the tangata whenua rōpū at that time for Cody Dieback, and in conjunction with Scion, and a number of those scientists that were involved are involved in Ngā Rākau Takitaki now. So that was basically based on what Waitangi's been saying on ensuring that the ownership, the control and authority over knowledge and taonga materials can be, sorry, my screen's can be, you know, the linkages to where that has come from can be appropriately maintained and recognised and cared for. So it's really, at its basis level, you could call it intellectual property, but it's more about enhancing the mana of those hapu and iwi whānau on the ground that are involved, and it's about ensuring that I think what has happened is people have given permissions or have been involved on occasion, historically, but then the material or the information that they have potentially given permission to be utilised by the science fraternity then goes into it's not the ether, but it goes into a system where it can then be used multiple times by others, and the sort of the link and the connection is lost, and then you might not know that your material that you gathered for something is then being utilised for multiple other research in 10 years time or 20 years time, and it's no longer being linked back to you and your rohe. So it's really about it's basic stuff like that, but I think it starts with a sort of triggers document process where scientists can work through with mana whenua a whole range of questions. How do you feel about this? Or what would you what do you think if we used your material in this way? Or is it, you can start to get into those really sticky questions around genetic information and how genetic information might be being used or manipulated. So there's a whole range of I don't want to say permissions, but there's a whole range of relationships with your taonga or your knowledge that you're sharing that need to be sort of not ticked off, but gone through quite a comprehensive list to ensure that you as the owners of that information and that resource are really clear of, and the scientists are really clear of all the ways in which that can be used or shared, and any information, any research or work or that can be shared widely afterwards or utilised or commercialised in some way is clearly you have control and a measure of control or ownership depending on what has been agreed to that information, and you're appropriately acknowledged in any research, publications and things like that. I feel like this is a very convoluted answer.
So can I say it's the cultural authority agreements, if I could just sum that a little bit. The cultural authority agreements are a pragmatic approach to the fact that scientists and researchers are having direct impact or using and accessing taonga. And taonga under Article 2 has a cultural authority and a strong relationship with Māori or mana whenua. So because the funding comes from the Crown, it's Crown funding, there is an expectation that agencies, bodies and groups that use Crown funding in science and research, that they engage directly with the mana whenua, the Crown partner, the treaty partner, and to talk about the way in which that science and research is going to impact that taonga. So scientists and researchers use publications. It's a currency. It's a research. It's part of a publications. We recognise that as currency, and so so a lot of publications don't go to Māori about the work that's gone on in their regions or in their rohe or in their forests or in their oceans without Māori having cited any of those things. And quite often those things will be a way of rewriting or redetermining a Māori or mana whenua narrative. In addition to that, Māori have the right under that authority under Te Tiriti to have a say and to be in a position to protect their taonga. And so if scientists and researchers are taking that taonga, whatever that is from those respective areas, mana whenua should be in those conversations. And what the cultural authority agreements do, they set the parameters for the engagement, for the purpose, of the research, for who is doing the research, for the timeframes for the research, and what are the outcomes of the research, and it now enables mana whenua the ability to be able to have controls over the way their taonga, information and data about their taonga is being utilised by researchers and scientists and eventually agencies and other groups. So that's the cultural authority arrangement.
Right. Thanks, Whakamana. I actually have a question from Kate Nolan, which follows really nicely on from this conversation. But Kate, I'm going to unmute you, and maybe you can ask it yourself, given that you, as you said in your question, it might be a wee bit garbled, so maybe you can explain it better than I can ask it. Is that okay, Kate, if I unmute you? And well, I'm going to anyway, so there you go. I know. Hopefully we can, if you can unmute and ask. If I can't unmute you. No, maybe I can't. If we can't get her, I'll try and attempt her question. Kate basically says, it sounds like the cultural agreement process relies more widely on safe data infrastructure that adopts levels of a stop-go security levels for information access. Are there conversations that reach into the design and implementation of data architecture?
Are there conversations that reach into the design of an architecture
of data architecture?
In terms of the way in which Māori perceive the data and information being produced by scientists and researchers or being gleaned from?
I think what Kate's saying is, look, you know, your cultural safety sounds like a way of protecting and providing the stop-go, as Julianne was saying, a stop-go kind of protection around information flow. So are you looking at data infrastructure around protecting?
So, okay, so Māori have always protected their information and data. You know, Māori have always been very protective of the way in which our narrative is being relayed. We have a thing called taonga tuku iho, which is intergenerational sharing of information and data. Our culture is through an oral tradition. With technology and those types of things, and also wider social networks and media picking up the way in which Māori articulate their existence or their lens on the world. These things are shared more widely, but ultimately the source of the data, it's just like anything that's you know, within integrated surveillance we talk about data being temporal, so it has authenticity at the time that it's actually loaded to a website or to a social media platform. And even if it's not true, even if it's not someone's truth, it's actually seen as authentic at that time of loading. Well, that's the same with Māori in terms of this is just one perspective. I know that others in this in our group may have others, but the information, it comes from a source. We have a validity around that source. That information is transferred in the way that that it's been heard. And with new technologies, we're able to, you know, be more sophisticated about that. But certainly, Māori have always had ways of having methods and approaches of protecting information and data, because that basically is our narrative. That's the way we describe ourselves, and that's the way we retain our cultural individuality or distinction. That's my thought on that.
I have time for one more question before we have to wrap up, and that's one that came through the chat room to me, which says that or are mana whenua responding to the Te Whakahononga approach, and is this empowering them in their research and knowledge in their rohi, or is this supporting them with their research and knowledge in their rohi? So how have mana whenua responded at first to the Te Whakahononga approach?
Oh, I'm so sorry I'm taking up so much of this conversation, but this was actually a piece of work for this approach. So we've fielded it with, we've already had initial conversations with mana whenua about an integrated research approach that allows them to view the information and data, the research projects, and to front foot this work, and also the option to say whether or not they want to be involved or not, and at what level. So obviously Māori are waiting and interested in how this will be progressed, and for the most part mana whenua are happy with the approach. In fact, some are quite ecstatic with the approach, because it is something that's new, and it is something that Well, the approach, the integration of all the research is new. The cultural authority arrangements, as Julian said, has been used across some of the other CRIs, and so we've been able to adapt that. And so we know that because mana whenua generally want to be involved in research and science, they want to be knowing what they also want to have solutions for Kauri, dieback, and murder rust and other pathogens that are affecting our taonga, and they want direct relationships with scientists and researchers to find information out that support their better management and kaitiaki of their taonga. So obviously this is good for them. They have received it warmly.
Thank you, Waitangi. We're completely out of time, and there are questions loaded up for Te Whakahononga. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your questions. Thank you, Desi, Barry, and I can see others coming through. Some very good questions there, even ones that I'd like to pose to you. I'm going to take them so that those who are watching know. I'm going to pose them to the team outside of this session, and then hopefully during the break I might be able to post some of the answers for you, or someone might come on during a break and answer some of them if that's okay with the team. But thank you. I just want to acknowledge the work that this team are doing. Kia ora to Tracy, who's come on to try and coordinate and corral our research co-leads in particular. This is really important work, and we believe it's a different way of approaching the way we engage with mana whenua. It's about coordination and minimising impact on the ground for our whānau as well. We hope that out of this project in the next couple of years, we'll be able to share some of the learnings with the wider research community, but importantly with our mana whenua. But we know more than anything that this will make things easier on the ground, but it will also create, we're adamant it will create better results for our kauri forests and our myrtle trees in particular. So thank you, the Te Whakahononga team. Thank you, Albie, Dave, Julianne, Tracy, and Waitangi. Appreciate your time today. And I'll let you go now while I move over into the next program. And so the next, thank you for that, guys. The next program that we're going to look at is Impact Area 1, in particular, the impact area around Whakamana and power. And so I'm going to ask Daniel. Daniel, as many of you will know, is the director, the co-director of the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, my other half. And Daniel's going to take us through this session. So kia ora, Daniel.
Oh, ngā mihi Mel, koutou mā, me to Albie and everyone on screen. So tēnā koutou katoa, ko Daniel Patrick Ahau. Proud and privileged to be here in this role of co-director and Mel's other half. I'm just getting my screen sorted here, sorry, aramai. So this session here, we're going into the first of the sessions, and it was great to have Te Whakahononga to open us and hear from our co-leads around that important and powerful integrated program that really does work across ngā rākau takitaki. So this session is around one of our impact areas, and people may know or may not that there are 3 impact areas, and there was a slide that came up there with ngā rākau takitaki and 3 impact areas, and we'll be working through, of course, the summit with those impact areas. So my role in this session 1 is Whakamana or empower, and the others will follow on later today. This impact area is focused on helping New Zealanders protect our precious environment ki te Whakamana tātou o Aotearoa whānui ki te manaki tō tātou taiao. How do we do this? What are the drivers, levers, ways to whakamana our communities, those across our country to act, and ultimately, of course, to save our iconic trees, the vision, the mission, the goal that we're all focused on within ngā rākau takitaki. So how will the session work? A little different to the last, that we will have a video. We will have a video for 2 of the themes. So there's 2 themes in this area, Oranga and Mobilising for Action. So we will start off firstly with Oranga. We'll have the panelists, the co-leads or research leaders that are present introduce themselves. We'll have the video show, and then there'll be opportunity 10 to 15 minutes, say, for question and answers. So do put your questions into the question or chat function within your webinar system. And just a reminder for other panelists to keep their cameras and microphones off. So Oranga, the first theme of the two for this session, Oranga te mauri o te rākau, te mauri o te ngāhere, te mauri o te tangata, is a suite of kaupapa Māori based projects that examine te ao Māori to find solutions to kauri dieback and myrtle rust and restore the collective health of trees, forests and people. The projects are unashamedly Māori and collectively will show how mātauranga-led research can contribute to contemporary biosecurity issues while addressing the aspirations of Māori and their communities. The Oranga theme is co-led by Melanie Mark-Shadbolt and Valence Smith of AUT. Valence isn't here with us today, but there are the other team members here, leaders in this space. So tēnā koutou, Mel, Jamie Ataria, Tohi Ashby. I'd appreciate if you could just unmute your microphones and screens, and just a brief introduction. Of course, Mel, kia ora. We do know you well, but Jamie and Tohi, are you?
And the other ones that are online as well. So I'll start off and then I'll try and get the team in as well, many of whom have come in on the attendee. I can see, because I've got the privilege of seeing, have come in on the attendee line rather than a panelist line. But online today, and Albie, if you could just chuck your camera on as well, that would be good, and come on, is so kia ora koutou. As I said, I'm Melanie Mark-Shadbolt. The privilege of co-leading this theme alongside Valence Smith, who sends his apologies. He's in a different wānanga today. And we have a fairly large team, as you will see, including Tohi Ashby and Jamie Ataria and Jason Cooper, who are online, and hopefully they'll get their cameras freed up and they'll be able to introduce themselves at some stage, maybe after the video. We also have Albie Marsh online, who leads a murder rust project within Oranga. As you heard before, he's at Plant and Food, Waitangi Wood, and I work alongside Aroha Mead, have the privilege of working alongside her in the SEED program, both in different it might be her. Of course, we also have Joni Koya, who's online, and hopefully we can and say hi to her as well. And then we have two what we call critical friends. They are overseas, and I know that one of them was going to try and join us. Kia ora whānau, you can introduce yourselves. Try and join us, even though it's probably the middle of the night for her, but Mariella from Scotland and Simon Lambert from Canada are part of our program as well. So if they're online, then perhaps they'll join as well. But I'll hand over to the whānau, who are all huddled together, which is lovely to see in Whangarei. So, Jamie.
Oh, kia ora, Jamie. We can't.
Kia ora tātou. Ko taku ingoa ko Tohe Ahipi, Tohe Ashby. I hail from Ngāti Hine. Ko hau tēnā. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Ai.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jason Cooper taku ingoa, no Ngāti Hine, me hoki.
Tēnā no i tātou katoa, ko Jamie Ateri taku ingoa, no roto ngā iwi o rongo mai wahine Ngāti Kahunganu me Ngāti Rauko. Kia ora mai tātou.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Thanks for, and as Mel said, it's great to see you on screen. Mel, yeah, one more team member.
Sorry, before I leave it to you, and I won't do it anymore, I promise, Daniel. I also want to acknowledge Hori Parata, who's online today, and though we can't see him, Hori is a huge component of all of our research and working alongside and with Matua Tohi. So kia ora, Matua Hori.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thanks. And thanks so much for the contributions to the videos. They are amazing. I've watched them all in a series, and they will be released. But we're privileged now just to get an insight and an overview around Oranga. So if we could watch the video, we'll watch the video that'll be played by the organisers, and then at the close of the video, we'll have an opportunity to discuss the questions that you have, and I'll put them around the panelists. Kia ora. Oh, kia ora koutou. What an awesome insight and overview of the research. That was fantastic. Just the deep mātauranga community knowledge. We must acknowledge those that contributed to it, those that were present, and Ngāriki Ngātai, who directed the series of videos that we'll be watching through today. So just a reminder, do ask some questions, but just one to start from me and hopefully provoke some discussion and more questions from the attendees. Really more to Tohi and Jamie. Just thinking, how has Ngā Rākau Takitaki supported your work, your rangahau or rongoa, your rongoa practice and what you do?
Very good question. Sorry, Toy and I were just debating who was going to answer that question. He's given me the eyebrow mandate. So, I think it's, Ngā Rākau Takitaki really has allowed, I think, Tohe the abilities and the freedom to continue doing what he needs to do, what he's passionate about, and what he feels a responsibility to do. My job really is to help facilitate that. And provide Tohi with that Matutohi with that ability to carry on what he's doing. So again, I think as Mel put it in the video, that this is we play to a prescribed game plan. That game plan's generally not ours. So we need to provide I guess the support in order for people like Matutohi and others, to do what they need to do.
Oh, hi. We do, totally. So you mentioned around your supporting there, Jamie, kia ora. And really in Ngā Rākau Takitaki, having this, such tohunga, involved, the rongoa experts, this deep knowledge from communities, we walk that fine line then between supporting and including mātauranga Māori, and exploiting communities' knowledge, and we have to have a lot of care around that. How are we going to ensure we don't exploit, or how do we ensure that we don't stray into an exploitative sort of process of that community knowledge, that mātauranga?
Go, Jamie.
Great question, Daniel. I think part of it is one of the great benefits of this particular part of Ngā Rākau Takitaki is really allowing Māori to a place to undertake this research. And I think te kapono aroha, I think as Valence put it, really provide that framework within which to assess our own progress as Māori within this, but I think also for non-Māori who may have involvement with communities and with this knowledge, this corpus of knowledge. I think there's some really important learning things that are going to come from these series of projects that have been undertaken within the Oranga theme. But I think it is a very important point, because Western science knowledge and mātauranga, they're actually different. They have, I guess, different ways of operating. They have different expectations and obligations around them. And I think this is sometimes where we find within a Western science frame that there are a range of things that as a scientist you're required to do, which can actually be quite converse and in some ways create a lot of tension and friction within a mātauranga Māori perspective. And I think having an awareness of that is a first step towards understanding what is best practice when you're working within that Māori knowledge frame.
Yeah, kia ora, Jamie. So just a reminder to attendees, do feel free to ask any questions. So, I think we may have one coming through, but it looks very long, Kate. But I love that Valence has put in te kapono aroha around those relationships, around that partnership, around the way we do things. That's brilliant. And we touch on the difference, I suppose, of this research, of this approach, which is important to us in the science system and to those in mainstream. So how is this research viewed by those in the mainstream? When you share these components and these ideas, it's still predominantly Western dominated, as we know. But how is this research, these new ways of doing things, embraced? And maybe we chuck it over to Albie or Mel.
Albie's waving at me. No, I'm waving at Albie. So the thing, isn't it? We'll try and get out of the answering questions. You can see how our theme rolls, can't you? That's a really good question, Daniel. I mean, we are a wee bit probably naive, and we think that roses and unicorns and and the like, but we love this program unashamedly, and so I guess what we see is support, and I can see that kind of in Kate's question. I think we're at the precipice of a really nice time where people want to be involved in mātauranga Māori research. They want to do the kind of work that we're doing. They want to see how it contributes to their Western-based science and their normal everyday science. But what we've got to be really careful about is that we don't end up doing other people's work and doing the work of the other. Sorry, my battery's about to die. Doing work of the other, as Jessica Hutchings would tell us. Our job is to be really, really clear that we are doing work for Māori. This is kaupapa Māori research, and our first commitment is not only to the environment, but to our whānau, to mana whenua and our communities. Yes, we want to bring everyone else on the journey with us when the time is right, but unashamedly right now we want to focus on doing Māori research. I think in part, Daniel, we're seeing, as you said, we're seeing lots and lots of support for this from non-Māori researchers as well, because it is quite exciting work. So I'll leave it to Albie or next question.
Albie, we can't hear you at the moment, Albie. Just trying.
The organiser didn't want to mute me. But all I'd add to that is that what Mel said right at the beginning was that this is unashamedly Māori. So a lot of the concepts, a lot of the work are following what would have happened traditionally in some areas. But the other thing, I suppose, is going back to basics and listening to our environment and listening to what's actually happening around us and understanding why we have so much more disease now. And a lot of that is due to the fact that a lot of our ecosystems are unwell. And we talk about the waterways, we talk about the forest environment, and a lot of the species that supported the bigger trees like the Kauri, etc., are not that present or not present anymore. Therefore, we have unhealthy ecosystems as a result of that. So we're not seeing the synergies that occurred with the understories, the other plants creating microbiota in the soil that assisted, the bigger plants, and you're not seeing the canopy cover, so we're getting a lot more wind disturbance. Those sorts of things are occurring now. So, we just need to pause a little and just observe a lot more on what's happening to those ecosystems around us.
Well, kia ora, Albie. I have got a question here for Matua Tohi. How do you feel working with this generation, or how do you feel working with the generation of young Māori trying to put new resources and tools at the service of your mahi? How do you feel working with this generation of young Māori?
I think with the work that I'm doing at the moment, because I'm actually doing a lot of work with Moro Rangatahi, our taitama tāne, taitama wahi, and bringing them up to a space where mātauranga Māori is up at that level. So we tuning them into that realm. And I suppose, and so that's where it's at for me. It's actually, we need to train our young people up in that space of mātauranga Māori. Yeah.
Kia ora. And just
end on that? Sorry, Daniel. Because one, I just want to thank Maria for calling some of us young, not me. I'm sure she's not referring to me. This generation of young Māori researchers. She must be referring to Jamie. So thanks for that. I guess part of, as Matuatohi said, part of the excitement is working at the, we talk about working at the nexus of mātauranga and Western-based science all the time, but we forget to talk about how that nexus works for Māori researchers as well. So equally, there are Māori who are Western-based science trained, who aren't necessarily strong or have access to mātauranga, and vice versa. We have our whānau, our researchers, as I said, we take a broad definition of researchers who work in the mātauranga space, or as Valence says, the kōrero tuku iho space, who don't have the Western-based science training. And so we love working at that nexus as well, because that's about upskilling our own communities, as Maria asks in her question, and probably just rolling into one of the other questions that popped up, which is around the integration. And so we're really clear that, as Angus McFarlane says, that it's okay to work in a Māori space, just like it's okay to work in a Western science space. The two don't always have to come together. So integration isn't always the best option, and it isn't necessarily what we're always striving for. We're quite happy to work in our separate spaces and then come together and integrate where we need to, or where's necessary, or where the benefit is. So we kind of take that approach where it's okay to be apart, but it's also really exciting when we can come together and find new solutions and novel tools.
Yeah, kia ora, Mel. I've got another question here. It just notes that in the video, the comment was made that the research results needed to be validated by the recipe for the rongoa. But the recipe for the rongoa would not be released to protect it. And that's some of what we touched on, I suppose, around the exploitation of knowledge. There seems to be a dilemma here on how the outcomes are validated. The Western approach is to include all the detailed methods and statistical analyses. Could someone elaborate on how this is handled in mātauranga approaches? So it's sort of that validation of mātauranga and these approaches, which are quite different, hugely different and important. And we've touched on the exploitation, which is something that we do have to be very mindful of in terms of this knowledge. But just elaborate, how is the validation handled around mātauranga approaches or the rongoa?
I'll start, and then I'm definitely going to hospital pass this to Jamie. So I'm going to start by saying what Whaaroha tells us all the time, and that's why everyone's laughing. And Whaaroha is really, really clear, Aroha Mead, in telling us that there are lots of different ways to protect our mātauranga, and in particular this project and the rongoa work that Matuatohi is doing. And so when we talk about what we want to protect, we're talking specifically about the concoction, the recipe that Matuatohi and the team, and Matuhori and others, are using to to experiment in protecting our kauri trees. And we're really clear that we could go down two avenues, which are quite common in science and in our communities. One is we could go for a patent. So we could take the recipe and we could go for a patent, and then all of you will know what's in the recipe. But as soon as you know what's in the recipe, we haven't protected it from a mātauranga perspective, and we haven't protected our knowledge. So we're not interested in going down the patent line. So as Whaaroha says, we have to go down effectively what is the trade secret line, like the KFC recipe, where we just don't share it, where we lock it up in a vault, that is Matuatohi, and we protect it and we protect him. And so we're effectively taking that route. What the critical friend does and what Jamie's work does is they allow us to share the process. So there are parts of the methodology that we will share, and we will talk about how we've developed this project, how we've gone about our trials, how we've selected trials. All of that stuff will be done in a normal science method where we have peer-reviewed publications, and we will share process. What we don't want to share is intimate detail of the mātauranga and the recipe, and actually that is consistent with the science approach. And I'm going to credit Waitangi here. One of the things that Waitangi often says is that when we think about protecting knowledge in the science space, scientists are the first to tell us that we need open access, we need to share all the data, and that the problem with working with Māori is that they don't want to share and it's closed off. And actually Waitangi, again, credit to her, argues that it's actually the other way around, that Māori say we don't want to share and we're really closed off, but actually we share far more than scientists do, who actually don't want to share their data until they've been able to release their publication. So what we're trying to do is a mixed model of the both, where we share parts of the process and we keep other parts of the process, as everyone else would, very private and very confidential. And that is actually what is consistent with our practices, we believe, and that is ensuring that the intimate detail, the know, only the tohunga, Matatohi should know, are protected, and we share what we're allowed to share. But I'm going to hospital pass to you, Jamie, for the closing.
Well, I don't need to add anything. Actually, that's a really good, I guess, outline and description of why, the differences between the two knowledge systems, right, and the expectations on both. So I think, nothing more to add. Well done, Mel.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, that was a comprehensive and well, a great response. Hey, I don't see any other burning questions on the side there, but we've got a good sense of the mahi. We've unpacked some of the issues, what we need to protect, and I just interested in what's the focus, maybe the next year. What are the next steps and critical aspects that you need to work through?
Go, Jamie. Go, Jamie.
I guess we are, as I said before, preface before, that we are really about, or my role and Jason's role is really about supporting our tohunga rongoa to carry on with what Matatohi is doing. So really, we're about expanding, I guess, the work that Matatohi is doing into different sites. Again, this is part of the information and ensuring that what has been done is that's the repeatability side of the work that we're doing. So again, a couple of Western science precept there. It's also about training. So again, the notion of bringing more whānau into kei Tiaki into this conversation. Kei Tiaki, we have concerns about the order of their Kauri trees. So again, broadening, I guess, the ringaropa, the busy hands that are helping to address this issue. It's also about assisting Matatohi in terms of the infrastructure required to undertake the important mahi that he's doing. There's also a range of educational, I guess, events that Matatohi is involved with our rangatahi, also with communities. And just empowering Māori to be a big part of this of the solution. So again, there's a lot on our plates for the coming year and years that follow that. But really looking forward to this, and it really is a unique opportunity, an amazing opportunity for our knowledge to actually have its time in the sun. And I think we just finished having a discussion this morning about. Part of the empower, protect, and restore. Part of the restore is actually recovering from the colonial processes that have actually hammered our knowledge, the last 100+ years. And so this project is one of the few projects where we're actually able to provide the mana, the space for our own knowledge systems to flourish. And I think this, and I really do say this with hand on heart, that this is an amazing experience to make that empowerment occur.
Kia ora, Jamie. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. Thanks very much for the contributions, for the responses. That comes to the close of this themes session. We do have mobilising for action next. So just, as I say, just thank you. Appreciate the sharing, the contributions. We'll just move straight into, kia ora koutou, we'll move straight into mobilising for action. So while Mātauranga Māori was an area of underinvestment, and we're investing in that in ngā rākau takitaki, so was the social science, hence the next investment, an important investment. The second theme in Whakamana is mobilising for action. And Mobilising for Action is a project that focuses on the human dimensions of forest health management, specifically kauri dieback and myrtle rust. And maybe we say kauri ora and myrtle ora. Mobilising for Action understands that all people have a role to play in biodiversity conservation, especially when it comes to protecting taonga species from invasive pathogens. And that understanding the human dimensions of forest health management means exploring the connections between people and the ngāhere, the forest, and people and the titao, the environment. This project, or this theme, sorry, is co-led by Marie McEntee and Natasha Tassel-Matamoa. And we've got both of them here with us. Kia ora kōrua. If you'd just like to introduce yourself. Natasha, kia ora.
Kia ora. Ko Natasha Tassel-Matamoa tōku ingoa hiuri ahau no ngā iwi o Te Atiawa me Ngāti Makia kei Rarotonga. Kia ora koutou, my name is Natasha. I work at Mesa University in the School of Psychology and hail from Te Atiawa and Ngāti Makia in Rarotonga.
Kia ora, Marie.
Ko Marie McEntee, tōku ingoa. Ko kai ako, hei kai rangahau, ahau, iti wānanga tamaki makaurau. It's lovely to be here, and it's a pleasure to be a co-lead alongside Tash for Mobilising for Action. I should just say that we have some people who are going to join us, some of our leads, our project leads who are in the audience at the moment, and they'll join us for the question and answer session, and we'll introduce them then.
Oh, kia ora. Kia ora, ngā mihi korua. Great to have you here. Now, again, we'll watch the video. Great having these videos. Great that you've taken the time and we've got them available to present to the attendees here. So do think about your questions, your pātai, all those watching. And after the video, we'll have other speakers or the research team members come to the screen. Oh, kia ora. Again, an excellent overview of the research and the varying projects, many elements to connect, explore and understand the connections, the drivers, and the ways in which we can whakamana our communities to act. Again, just a reminder to the attendees, do ask your questions. And Marie, you mentioned some team members that were here. Maybe you could just note those and no mai haere mai. Do come to the screen and be part of this discussion and any questions. If you could just name them, or unless you.
Yes, so we've got Andrea Grant, and in fact, one of Andrea's projects, a couple of the projects were actually not mentioned in the video, so they weren't all covered. We just covered the 6 of our, I think, 8 that we're currently funding. So Andrea Grant, we've also got Alison Greenaway and Mark Harvey.
Kia ora koutou. If you could unmute, or maybe the organisers will, and your screen if possible. But just as that's happening, just to start the questions from me, and there are many aspects, and you might have to sort of hone into one or two or the higher level. What impact do you think your work has had so far? Thinking, I suppose, we're in Ngā Rākau Takitaki. You mentioned, Marie, and it's really recognised the disciplinary perspectives, this co-leadership, these different ways that you're approaching things. But what impact do you think your work has had so far?
I think one of the most important things that we are doing is this overall theme that we belong to is empowering, but to be able to empower, or to be able to work with empowerment, is to also understand. You have to start with understanding. And so that's our first year has really been about deeply understanding people's connections. And so that's where we've begun. Kia ora, Andrea, kia ora, Mark. Great to see you here both. And yeah, so we're looking at beginning in that space. I think one of the things that I've got to say is that there are really challenging conversations that we have to have if we are going to work in what's called a transdisciplinary space, working with communities, working with other researchers, working with mana whenua, working across disciplines, working across sectors. We've got to know how to do that. And we've got some really challenging conversations to have. And so I think one of the things that we've provided is to provide a safe space to be able to have those conversations that are, for many Western scientists, are decolonising conversations around our practices that drive our biases. And so we've got to do that in a way that really does enable people to feel that they can come to that conversation, feel safe in that conversation, but be empowered to also act from that. And I think we've made some good headways in that space. Tash, did you want to add to that one?
Sure, yeah, thanks Marie and Daniel. I think one thing that's really stood out for me so far is the lack of awareness among many of our groups of myrtle rust, and so that's been quite a clear thing across all of our rōpū, that pretty much no one had heard of myrtle rust. So for us moving forward, we see that as an area of focus for our rōpū Māori, and also, you know, if we're speaking, going back to Daniel's question about impact, for me that is an impact. Our rōpū are now aware of myrtle rust, whereas before they weren't, and are interested to find out more and learn more. So we're actually going back to a few of our rōpū just specifically for that purpose, to talk more about myrtle rust. So that's been a really interesting thing for me, that the impact is not just from I guess a scholarly or an academic perspective, but you know, people in our communities are interested to know more.
Kia ora, Tash, and tēnā koe, Mark and Andrea. Nice to have you here. Maybe just a brief introduction from both of you in terms of your, well, just to say kia ora to the many attendees. So, Andrea. Oh, we can't get the mic on at the moment. Maybe we'll just go to you, Mark, for the moment. There we go. Mark?
Great. Ko maka vi taku ingoa, ko mata waka no ngā whetoa iwi, ko whenua watakere ko Hikorangi. So yeah, I'm the project lead for Tūtaio Whakatairanga, and it's a very, very exciting project, and there's a whole bunch of us. Some are out there. Hi, kia ora. I know they're watching. So yeah.
Yeah, kia ora, Mark. And Andrea, we'll just try again. It doesn't seem to be coming through. We'll just continue. We are a little bit pressed for time. Aroha mai, Andrea. Hopefully the organisers can help there. And kia ora, Alison.
Kia ora.
So just in terms of your role.
Kia ora, Daniel. I'm involved with Andrea leading the post-colonial biosecurities program, which I've got to say is a real delight to be in such a public and esteemed forum, to be able to have that conversation and for it to be heralded within this program, this challenge. So real privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, kia ora, kia ora. And maybe this is a question for Mark. Art as research is an exciting approach to understanding and articulating the connection between people and the environment. What barriers and opportunities do you see in this research, or have you seen in this research?
Well, it's a massive question, because we're operating in a range of spaces. We're operating in Māori spaces and Pākehā spaces. We're also connecting across, you know, social sciences, what we call Western colonial sciences as well, in terms of awarenesses. For us, art is a way, like in a Māori perspective, art is interconnected with everything, and it's a way of understanding the world. Nothing is separate, you know. So knowledge is, there are many different kinds of knowledge, and art is a way to get people thinking, being aware, activated, involved, and it's in a range of media as well. Like we've got visual artists, we've got filmmaker, we've got a designer, and each one of those is approaching through the arts in different ways. Like we've just had a documentary made in relation to Graham Atkins and his stories with Ngāti Porou in the Whakamana range, and the death and dying of ramarama myrtle rust in that area, which is just massive. So we're hoping to release that. So yeah, and there are many ways we're looking at getting it out. We're starting at this stage. We are working with iwi closely in one or two places. We're working closely with Te Roroa, and we're developing how we engage with art. One possibility there is it could even be through waiata, and how waiata is used across back into the ngahere and with myrtle rust and kauri and etc. How could that be useful for iwi, with iwi leading it? So we're about mana mota hake in relation to art in our project for iwi and hapu, and so art is a fundamental thing in terms of getting public awareness in our perspective, and so far how we found it. If that generally answers your question.
Yeah, kia ora, Mark. That's fantastic. Hey, we're just about running out of time, but I'll put one more question. It's really Alison and Andrea. You've come here and about your project, and I suppose it was more the post-colonial, but just some key aspects of that in terms of the connections and changes in this post-colonial environment and futures. What sort of some of the key points around these changes that you're looking at?
We're really looking at the everyday practices that constrain us within science and also biosecurity. So it's those science, policy, practices, relationships. And a lot of us might be able to point to some of the big issues, but how they keep getting those big issues get really embedded through our everyday practice. So that's what we're looking at, and looking at how the shifts can happen within the system by addressing people's everyday practices.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora koutou. Hey, we have run short on time, aroha mai, but everyone's seen a lot, heard a lot around the project, and there will be posting and details posted further. The video series will be online, and I'm sure there's other opportunities to ask questions. Do put questions in the box, attendees, and we'll try and get responses to those. Even though the presenters won't be on screen, we can have written responses to you. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you for your leadership in this fascinating space, important in terms of bringing in those multiple dimensions, connecting, mobilizing, what are the drivers, the levers to actually create the action on the ground that we really do require. So kia ora koutou. So that is the end of the Whakamana Empower session. We've had two fantastic themes shared with their videos, which are really rich, and a short opportunity, and sorry that it is a short opportunity to ask questions and discuss with the co-leads, but there will be other opportunities. As Mel said, this was our inaugural session. So just in terms of the program from now, I was looking to see whether Mel would pop up, but I don't think she will. What we will do is we'll have a break. We will be back online, so don't log out, but at 12:30 we expect to kick into session 2. So Tiaki, a Protect, and that'll be led by Maureen O'Callaghan with 3 themes. During the break, I expect that a poll may come up shortly. Do please respond to that. You'll respond to that on screen, and would appreciate your responses. It is
and that you're refreshed and ready to go. We're about to kickstart into session 2, which is Impact 2, Tiaki or Protect, and this is by far our biggest impact area. It is in the challenge as well, in tranche 2, and so it is a long session. Thankfully though, it's going to be filled with amazing information, great researchers, and an awesome chair to take us through the process. So I would like to hand over and introduce you to Maureen O'Callaghan. Maureen is our science lead for NRT, co-leading alongside Nick Waipara, who you'll see in session 3. Maureen is based at Ag Research. There she is. An amazing research leader and manager in her own right, and like myself is finishing in this role, not with the challenge, but finishing in this role in a couple of days. So this is her bon voyage. We gave her the biggest work program to do today to lead into. So kia ora Maureen, I'll hand over to you to introduce the next session.
Ngā mihi mau, kia ora koutou, ko Maureen O'Callaghan aho. So as Mel said, welcome back to this afternoon session where we're looking at our impact area Tiaki or protect. And this area is a big one, as Mel introduced, and it's about making sure that New Zealand's biosecurity system is world class. So in this space, we've got a number of things that we need to achieve. We've got to be able to better anticipate emerging biosecurity threats than we've done in the past, and learn how to avoid new and recurring invasions. We also need to have state-of-the-art surveillance systems, but not just state-of-the-art. They need to be fit for purpose, and New Zealand surveillance systems, you know, they may have a different flavour on them in the future than what we see being used overseas. They have to be fit for purpose for Aotearoa. We also need to be deploying novel tools and technologies and strategies for control or eradication of biotic threats. And in Narako Takitaki, this is about, obviously our focus is on curry dieback and myrtle rust, but a lot of the learnings in this space will be applicable much more broadly across the biosecurity system. So we have 3 research themes in this space that you're going to hear about this afternoon. The first is risk assessment and ecosystem impact. The second is integrated surveillance, and the third is control, protect, cure. And just a quick reminder before we get started that about how we're running these sessions. So you'll be hearing from the co-leads via their videos soon. So that's a reminder for everyone else to please keep your cameras off and your mics off until it's your turn to speak. Okay, so we'll kick into it because we've got a lot to get through. It's a big, powerful session. So we're starting off this afternoon with risk assessment and the ecosystem impact theme. And this is one of the last themes that kicked off in Narako Takitaki, but it's addressing some really important gaps in the research landscape that have been identified, as many of the research projects have been identified in the curry dieback and myrtle rust science plans. Big gaps that we need to fill with new knowledge. So the risk assessment and impacts theme, it's taking a fresh look at risk assessment for the 2 diseases by taking a more holistic approach to risk assessment by assessing cultural, economic and social implications of the diseases. And that systems approach that the team is taking is also reflected in the ecosystems characterization part of the work as well, where the team are looking at linkages between plant and soil systems, biotic and abiotic components and drivers that are having an impact on Kauri ora and Maori ora, myrtle ora. So they're building in this work on previous and aligned work. So the team have been careful to factor in that previous work that's been ongoing, and also including kaupapa Māori approaches to increase the relevance of the work. So I'm going to invite Lutgard and Simon to introduce. So Lutgard and Simon are our 2 co-leads for this session, and hopefully we can have them unmuted or they can unmute so they can introduce themselves to us. Here we go.
Ko Lutgard Schmidten, man toko ingoa, no tia mania ho. So I'm an associate professor in ecosystem science and carbon at the University of Auckland School of Environment.
Kia ora, Lutgard, thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Simon Wagner tōku ingoa. I'm a social researcher out of Sion, based in Rotorua, and I have a background in social psychology, so looking at kind of the human implications and interactions with the environment.
Kia ora, Simon, and I'd also like to acknowledge Nick Waipara, who has been a big support to the 2 co-leads you see before you. Nick, I know, is around, but he's not on screen at the moment, but I'd like to acknowledge Nick's role in getting this theme set up. So I think we'll roll with the video. if the video is coming. This might be a good time to finish your lunch. We might have to jump straight into questions if we don't have a video or an introduction to the theme. And you're left there on screen, Simon.
Yeah, I guess if we don't have the video coming, we can instead show a bit of that screen or the PowerPoint that we had that Lutka put together that describes a few of the different projects that fit under our work. But just to, I suppose, introduce it, reiterate that the goal of our theme is basically to understand what the potential impacts of these diseases are on the ecosystems. And so there's two parts to that. One is actually understanding what the current state of all of those ecosystems are, because there's surprisingly large gaps in our knowledge about how the ecosystems function together, the people interact with them, and both socially, culturally, and economically, and of course then the ecological and the environmental interactions between all of the different species. So let me try to get the to share screen quickly. Can I do that? I need the permission.
I think you probably need permission for that, Simon.
All right, well, in the meantime, I can just talk to it a little bit. So basically, the idea behind this is that in order to really understand how we should respond to these two threats, we have to understand what is at risk and what potential impact that could have on us. Here we go, I can show my screen now quickly, so I'll just add that in. And just a moment. Here we go. Can you see this now?
We can't see. We can only see half of your slide, or I can only see half of your slide, Simon.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah, if you can put it onto full screen.
Yep.
Yep.
How's that?
Now we can see. Now the edge of it is cut off, but we can get the idea.
Okay. Well, I'll try to bring it back up to.
Yep. Mm.
There. Okay. If that's all right, I'll just keep going.
That's perfect, Simon.
Okay, great. So basically, we're trying to understand what the issues are that we can, that we're facing, so that we know how best to respond. The first part of the first research area is Te Whakahononga. So we've already heard about that this morning, the Te Whakahononga program, and within that there were several projects that are highly relevant to our theme. So we've been specifically funding those. Those are around the cultural health assessments, the cultural impact assessments, and the Hetohu project, which is looking at the different signs or the indicators of what a healthy forest looks like, and therefore helps us to understand what a diseased or unhealthy forest looks like. The second part of that is that we, in our second research area, this is looking at trying to do a risk assessment. And so developing a framework of how we can prioritize and understand where we're facing threats. There have been many risk assessment frameworks developed around the world, but we felt that they didn't really do a good job of capturing a New Zealand perspective, because they were, for the most part, missing Indigenous voices, and they certainly weren't coming from a worldview that could capture the Mātauranga perspective, or the Māori perspective, and using Mātauranga research involved in it. So we wanted to build off of this existing work. We're not trying to start from scratch, but to develop that into something that's more meaningful and practical for New Zealand. And to do that, we have recruited a PhD student, Tracy Godfrey, who you met this morning talking about the Te Whakahononga work program. So she's deeply involved in and is the project lead for the Te Whakahononga program, and at the same time is going to be helping us with that, that risk assessment program. The next part of it, the next research area, is the ecosystem characterization, and that is where we're looking at exactly what these ecosystems look like right now. So the Kauri ecosystems and the Myrtle ecosystems. As I said, we understand quite a bit about them, but there are also some very large gaps in our knowledge, and this is trying to understand those baselines and kind of set what the current state is now, so that in the future, when many of these long-term impacts occur, because of course the impacts over can occur over many decades or hundreds of years, these might take quite a long time before we see the full implications of these diseases. So if we measure what we have now to understand in 10 years' time when we look back and we can see the changes that have occurred. And when I say the changes, by the way, it's important also to mention that we're not just talking about the diseases of the impacts of the diseases, but the impacts of the things that we do to control the diseases. So also being able to help identify if any of our actions that we take to try to fight the diseases themselves might have a negative impact, or, you know, and at how they're shaping the ecosystem. And I'll go a little bit more detail into those for the ecosystem characterization. Or actually, perhaps, Lutgard, would you like to describe these sections?
Yeah, no, thank you. So maybe what this slide I'm trying to illustrate is the interconnectedness, and it fits so nicely because this morning's videos and talks and some of the questions are all related to, you know, these are systems, so the processes, the drivers, they are closely linked with each other, and this is what we try to achieve with characterizing the systems that will see about the linkages between above below ground. We see the linkages between the organisms and the factors driving it. So we'll have a component where we're looking into the change of forest communities with a strong focus on Kauri population. Simon, can you go to the next one? Thank you. So this is led by a PhD student, supervised by colleagues of mine here at the University of Auckland and at Manaki Whenua. Then we're also looking into the different functions which are provided by those species and which are then at the end providing us with precious resources and services. So looking into the carbon and looking into the functional traits, here with particular focus on Myrtaceae species, so assessing the effects of the disease on ecosystem functions and carbon sequestration. And this is led by a team at Manaki Whenua. We're already aware that we have strong implications of myrtle rust on, in particular, for myrtles. But what we know little about is what are the long-term implications. So in particular with the reproduction. So is there hopefully a next generation? So this is building upon monitoring which has been going on, in which we're looking now into a bit more depth, also looking into pollination functions. This is based and led by Sion. Then the next slide moves closer to the soil-plant interface. I mean, given that that Kauri dieback is a particular, or the pathogen is soil-borne, and the absolutely critical functions soil provide. We have quite a number of projects, you know, assessing the baseline, as Simon was indicating, but also in many of those systems we already see modifications, so assessing and starting to assess the impacts. So we're looking into microbial communities and how that's driven by particular site characteristics, but also by different pathogen loading. So a project with a PhD student based at AUT and supervised by a team at AUT, Manaki Whenua, and the University of Auckland. We're looking into root functions, something which we believe have been neglected, but absolutely critical, again, given that the pathogen attacks the roots of kauri. So now starting to look into their functions and characteristics, a master student based at the University of Auckland. And one more slide. Now also looking into those interactions using soil food webs, bringing together the organisms and functions and processes done and based at the University of Waikato. And coming back to absolutely critical characteristics and hopefully also indicators which we believe are easy to observe and monitor, looking into decomposition, understanding whether the quality and the quantity of litter contributing to forest systems is already affected by pathogens. So as those few slides have shown, one of our very, very strong aim and what we see also as a mandate is training the next generation. So with a really strong cohort of PhD students and master students now based at different organizations with a really, really strong support team. So what being said that the video not being able to play, because what I just like to emphasize is that systems approach, ecosystems approach at very, very different levels. So starting within the soil plant interface, then building up to the system, looking into above ground and below ground functions. And what Simon was indicating, that this is not restricted to the ecological components, but we're looking into the cultural, the social and economic components. And Simon may want to talk a bit more about what we're doing in the social space in close alignment with Mobilising for Action.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just close the...
Well done, team. We've pitched you into it.
Yeah, so with the social research, our plan has been from the start that we would delay our social, cultural, and economic research for the first year. And the intention behind that is because we wanted to allow time for the Te Whakahononga program to conduct its engagement and to start with its cultural work that's being led up from Mana Whenua up. And so we wanted to make sure that the work that is coming out of that program has an opportunity to influence and shape what we actually do from our Western science perspective when we look at social and cultural and economic impacts. We wanted it to be driven by the values and the issues, the questions that were identified by the different Mana Whenua groups involved and what they wanted to see out of our research. So that element of the research has been on pause for this first year while we wait for that program to continue. And so we will be starting to develop that shortly and fleshing out those ideas. In the meantime, we have had some gap analysis work done for economics, but it has so far been quite limited while we're aiming for that. In the end, the underlying core idea, as Lutgard said, though, is that we produce this holistic package, that we have an understanding of what is happening actually in the physical side of the ecosystems, so that then we can connect that through to therefore the implications and what those implications will be for the cultural, the social, and the economic side, the human parts of the ecosystems, and vice versa. And then what the actions that we have, the actions that we take in response to those impacts, what then that will bring back through into the environment. So the idea is to take that full encompassing view.
Thank you, Simon. And just a reminder to the audience out there, please to put your questions up, because Simon and Lutgard would love to be answering them, having done their introduction to the theme. But while you're talking, Simon, and about the risk assessment space, I know that you've got some international input into your research theme. So could you tell us a wee bit about that, please?
Well, one of the international inputs that we have is, so I mentioned our PhD student, you all have met, is Tracy Godfrey, and one of her advisors that we'll be working with is Andrew Robinson from the University of Melbourne's Centre for Excellence for Biosecurity Risk Analysis. They have been conducting a very thorough global review of the best ways or the frameworks to use for assessing biosecurity risk. But as I said, the part or the key component that's missing from that, from our perspective, and the reason why we can't just take that excellent work and apply it directly in New Zealand, is that it's missing that Maori worldview. And we recognize that we can't really do any work in New Zealand without bringing that in and having that as an important pillar for what we're doing. So the plan is that we will that Tracy's work will be to work with all of the different mana whenua groups that she's involved with through Te Whakahononga to develop a framework that comes from a Maori perspective, but takes advantage of the best of what the Western science has to offer and the best ideas that Western science have compiled to come up with something that is as fit for our purposes.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So you've got international best practice feeding in, but putting our own slant on it, and yeah, really exciting. It's a pity that we couldn't see Lutgard's video, because she takes us on a lovely walk through, I think it's through the Waitakaris. Yeah, and actually, we can see some of the impacts and some of the ecosystems that Lutgard's talking about. And when I was watching your video, Lutgard, I was reflecting on, I guess when we look back, I think I feel some regret that some of that baseline data hasn't been collected in all this time that we've had. And we find ourselves in this point and having to start collecting that baseline data. So your kind of thoughts on the need for that long-term research and how long might it need to go on?
Maybe I'll start. Given and the presentation we shared, so a lot of focus is on Kauri systems. We have a component of Myrtaceae as well, but given that Kauri is such a long-lived species, in its present state, heavily already affected by land use history, land use legacy, indicating that monitoring, long-term monitoring, is absolutely fundamental, and it provides now a nice opportunity to also talk about that we try to align and maximize, and here thanks to Te Kawaro Amaki, to tap or how should I say, align with ongoing efforts by regional councils. So, for example, the survey and also the monitoring, also with the aim of being long-term, using indicators, using approaches which could be easily rolled out to other sites, so that long-term perspective is coming in, and what I believe is critical, and usually not supported by the cycle of relatively short-term projects. So what we're setting up and we're already using, because some of the sites which we have been able to access in the Waitakere ranges with approval of Auckland Council and Te Kauraumaki. They have been set up a few years ago, so we'll already be able to tap into existing knowledge. So building upon that was very important for us to have at least a small window to go back in time. And also have already some information available, but now also having the unique opportunity to obtain some of the soil samples which have been collected as part of the Auckland Council surveillance program and analyze it in a similar way as we are doing the samples which we're collecting from the blood-based system. So all with the aim of being able to hopefully return in a number of years. So with tracking all the basics with the coordinates and the possibility and aligning and making it possible that we have really good metadata, and where we also heavily rely on what hopefully integrated surveillance will talk about, where cultural authority agreements come in to really make sure that the information is also protected. So yeah, no, absolutely critical for the long-term monitoring, and hopefully this project, and this is one of the mandates that we're setting up locations, points where people can return to in the future, and also now with having students and hopefully also the next generation following up to be able to revisit those sites.
Thank you, look good.
And I would just add that it's also we're really taking a strong approach on trying to establish data that can be useful in the future. So it's often we're looking at collecting data even where we may not have the ability to analyze it in the ways that we want to yet, but on the assumption that someone 10 years from now will thank us for having collected that data. And also in collecting data that is maybe a bit different from how Western science has approached doing it in the past, that by working with Te Whakahononga, the idea is to identify the signs throughout the Maramataka that different mana whenua groups would use to identify how they would characterize what a healthy forest looks like. And then trying to figure out how we can recreate that as Western scientists. What data can we capture that would support them to make those assessments, and to have somebody 10 years in the future to look back and actually have a point of comparison. So as others have talked about with capturing the sights and sounds, but similar concepts of how do we capture things like the experience of what being in the forest is like now, so that somebody in 10 years can come back, experience the forest for themselves, and compare that to the experiences that we've recorded, and be able to see qualitatively and experientially how that has changed. So it's not just a quite a dry statistic that we're trying to capture, but actually we're really trying to, in addition, capture some other novel ways of showing what what that healthy forest looks like.
Thank you, Simon. I've just see there's some questions coming up on the chat, so we'll have a look at that. I can get it to show up. So this is from, can you see it? Oh, it's from Kate, yep. Kate McInnes, and so Kate's saying she's joined a little late, but what do you plan to include in the long-term monitoring, or is that still being developed with mana whenua? I think you've got some ideas around that.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at a different question from that one. What do we plan to include in the long-term monitoring? So unfortunately, our program does not have the resource. We're not, our program will end at the end of the 3 years. So we can set up the baseline, but we are not ourselves necessarily doing the long-term monitoring. I think that's important to highlight, because this requires some political pressure to make sure that this does continue to get funding in the future. In terms of the specific things that we would be looking at, Lutgard went through some of the projects that we're looking at, as in terms of what species we can find in different places. For the human side of things, I'll speak to that before passing over to Lucard, but we would be looking at things. I mean, we have an idea, but we want an input from the mana whenua to see if what our people's connections to the forest and the people's connections to the place, whether that gives them a sense of a greater sense of well-being, or whether it is actually, you know, causing them.
Looks like we've got some gremlins in our system today.
Maybe we're already cut off.
Yeah, I might pass to you, Lucard.
Big harm emotionally when they think about the forest and the losses that have occurred. It's like you go after you learned from your grandparents. Oh. Sorry, were we cut off there?
Yeah, you were cut off. You went a wee bit off there, Simon. Just recap on your last few sentences. No. No.
Oh, just the idea that no.
Okay. No, I think there's something going on here in the system. We've got another question here from Kim Parker, who says, thank you for the great presentation, and they're keen to hear how monitoring surveillance is going to be balanced, considered with not spreading myrtle rust and curry dieback. So I might pass that one to Lucard, Simon, because you're having a few difficulties hearing you.
Yeah,
might be the weather.
No, see, this is, thank you for bringing it up, because we're very, very conscious that we want to minimize access to sites, because, you know, every site visit is a potential risk of carrying it. We have gone and developed a very, very, very detailed a management plan, which has been, you know, verified by Auckland Council. It has gone through a rigorous process of testing and confirming that we're keeping the risk to a minimum. That's what I should highlight, is that we minimize the visits, because basically we're collecting soil samples, and soil samples are then split among groups, given all the correct permits and transfer agreements. With the knowledge that the less people we have at site, the less likely that we transfer it. Also now using samples which have been collected by others, thus minimizing our access to those sites which are part of them. They are very, very remote. So yeah, no, we're very, very conscious to set up a very, very detailed plan to minimize the risk of transfer. In particular with the Kauri pathogen. Sorry.
Thanks, Lucard. And there's another question that's just popped up in the chat, which is a good one. Examples of accidental introduction of pathogens are unfortunately quite commonplace now, and increasingly so. And many of them are invasive and extremely damaging. So how will your work help us understand the behaviour and the impact of the diseases as a case study for other future pathogens? Do you think it'll have broader application?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, but I also would like to put the question back to the community, because As I say, we're seeing, the Kauri-dominated, the Mutesi-dominated systems as systems where those species are absolutely critical, ecological and culturally very important. But we aimed for indicators and processes which is not tied to whether it is now Kauri dieback or myrtle rust, which could be applied to any other pathogen. So looking into processes, looking into really critical processes, which links, as I was saying, the above ground with the below ground systems. So indication of quality of material coming in, indication of communities changing at molecular level with the microbial community, but also at an invertebrate level, but also above ground with plant species composition. So in that sense, the aim was to use processes and indicators which are indicators of health. I mean, that's coming back to Kauri aura, to Myrtle aura or Mutesi aura. So so that in that sense, independent of whether a particular pathogen is found at a site.
Okay.
At the risk of
Yep.
yeah, I might turn off my video.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that might help reduce the bandwidth.
Okay.
But we forgot to mention, of course, that our work for the risk assessment framework that Tracy Godfrey is undertaking is jointly being done with SO3 from the wider challenge. So that's strategic objective 3, and they are looking at doing a risk assessment for future pathogens and other invasives. And the intent is that Kauri dieback and myrtle rust can serve as case studies that Tracy will then broaden out from to develop something that's a wider, more adaptable framework that could be used for any other future threat. So it's very much part of our thinking that we are certainly focusing on these 2 particular pathogens, but aware of the context and the other threats that are likely coming in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That's great. And I'm going to draw this session to a close. I want to thank you, Lutgard and Simon, for your agility and your ability to respond. And that's what Ngā Rākei is all about. So you've demonstrated the values very well. And I'd also like to again acknowledge Nick's role in this and Tracy Godfrey as well, and for your leadership in this space. So thank you, and well done, team, for coping without the expected video. I'll introduce now the next theme, and while in the background I believe the support team are testing out the video system, so something went wrong there when they were about to play the video for risk assessment and ecosystem impact. So while they're doing that, I'll carry on and introduce the next theme, and they'll hopefully give me some kind of signal about what's going to happen next. I really would have, yeah, this is not my cup of tea. I would never make a TV presenter. Ducking and diving when things don't work. But anyway, so thanks. Oh, here's Mel. She might have something to tell us.
Fantastic, Maureen. And I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, that we will try and play the risk assessment video if we can, either in the break or at the end of the summit. So those who want to watch and stay online will try that. But it looks like the videos are working now, so I'll go back to you, Maureen, and you can carry on.
Okay, so I'll carry on as if it's going to work. Okay, so our next theme today is the integrated surveillance theme, and as surveillance has always come up as a really critical research priority in the science plans that were developed a while back. It's an area of intense interest, and there is a lot of research in this space. And to date, though, data on the presence and severity of the diseases has been collected by many different organisations using a range of different methodologies, and sometimes it's shared and sometimes it isn't. And at the same time, iwi and hapu are also urgently seeking answers about the presence or absence of the pathogens and the diseases in their rohi, as are all land managers. So this theme is a really important one for Ngā Rākau Takitaki. It was one of the first to kick off, and early work was focused on the development of a Mataranga Māori-based framework for surveillance. And you've heard the Māori co-leads talking this morning about elevating the status of Mataranga Māori, but this framework is also about elevating the status of the environment, or the ngāhere, within the surveillance system. And it uses data and information important to Indigenous ecosystems and narrative from rangatira, hapu and iwi, who have whakapapa and kaitiaki of their taonga species. So it includes a range of novel approaches, really quite exciting novel approaches to have been pulled together to deliver this piece of research. And it's just started to hail. So I've got a tin roof, so I hope you can still hear me. But it's a really complex piece of work, and so it's full credit to the team. It's also required an element of going back to basics to have some of those conversations that really needed to be had around data sovereignty, data sharing, data custody, and other really quite thorny issues that we haven't really addressed that well in Aotearoa in the past, and how the sharing, how existing data and emerging data can be shared on the presence and absence of the severity of the diseases, and how that data can be shared safely. So the co-leads for this theme are Waitangi Woods, who is, we've already met Waitangi this morning, but hopefully she'll come online again now and introduce herself. Kia ora, Wai, and introduce herself in this space. And our other co-lead is Dean, who's a research ecologist from Manaki Whenua. So I'll just get you two to introduce yourselves while I deal with this hail up here.
Kia ora, Maureen. Kia ora koto katoa. Ko Dean Anderson toku ingoa, and I'm a research ecologist at Manaki Whenua, and I'm a co-lead with Waitangi Wood, who you'll see in a minute, and with Audrey Lustig, who is also an ecologist at Manaki Whenua, Cecilia Latham at Manaki Whenua, and we're doing a lot of work with Nari Williams at Plant and Food Research. And so thankfully we have a video to show, because we don't really have a presentation, but you won't see me in that video. You'll see Waitangi, because she gives such a good and eloquent description of our work. But just Mel asked us if we weren't in the video to give a little bit of more background on ourselves, if that was the case. So my work as an ecologist really aims to help kaitiaki and managers access all the available information out there to address environmental issues. And in this case, that includes all Mataranga and Western data together, because as we face these complex environmental issues, we need to access all the information we can. And so to build on the Mataranga Maori framework for surveillance that Waitangi is going to go into in the video, we're developing two technological tools to do that, to make data and information available to people who need them. And one is a data infrastructure tool that will facilitate sharing and accessing data while maintaining data sovereignty. And then the second tool is a basic analysis tool that integrates both Western science data and Mataranga knowledge into it to assess a level of confidence where the disease is not present. So if you find the disease, it's present, but if you go out and look for it and don't find it, it may or may not be there and you just haven't found it. And so this tool allows anybody really to use it online It's a user-friendly tool. And so we're just moving into trialing this with mana whenua and environmental managers. So with that, I would like to just introduce Waitangi Wood, my co-lead, and pass it over to you, Wai.
Kia ora, Dean. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi kia koutou, ko moiho te maunga whangaro te awa mamari me mamari o ku waka, ngā iwi o whangaro o ku iwi, ngā te rua taku hapu, taupo te marae, te pahi te tangata. Kia ora koutou. I'd also like to acknowledge our other two members, that two important team members, Shamila Savramutu from Canterbury University, who's working on an integrated intelligence platform, or that digital platform, a federated platform that Dean has introduced, and Michael Martin, who's specialising or focusing on determining how we maintain data sovereignty and protection of data whilst we're sharing it or utilising it. So just wanted to recognise both of those in the introduction, as well as our other team. Michael Martin is with AUT, Auckland University, Aroha mai. So kia ora koutou. Kia ora Maureen.
I muted myself. Right, so thank you, Dean and Wai, for the introduction, and I'm hoping now. Kia ora Wai, thank you for that video, and just acknowledging the members of the team that have worked so hard and are continuing to work really hard in this space. They're bringing together a lot of different strands of research and tools. And there's heaps of interest from stakeholders in this space, in this project. So it was great to hear that in a bit more detail today. So I think we don't have a lot of time left for questions, because we had sort of a longer introductory period. But I'd just like to ask the team, first off, what's your priority for this coming year? Because there's so much interest in this. So when are we going to see some things we can look at and get our teeth into?
I think the priority is getting these biodiversity management areas defined and publicly available, really, so that we can begin to work with them, and then begin to apply our tools to those biodiversity management areas, start to get some data going through our integrated intelligence platform, and then apply our proof of absence tool to that. So it's starting to take what we've developed sort of in theory, these ideas, and put them into practice within these BMAs. And why, if you could add to that.
Yeah. So the beauty of working within the Ngā Rākau Takitaki themes is that we've been able to partner on this particular piece of work with Te Whakahononga other co-leads within the themes. So the information, so that research and science will generate information and data across 16 BMAs. There's over 36 research projects that are part of the 5 themes invested into Whakahononga. And so the research and information, data and information will be tested and applied within the establishment of the digital platform, and also for us to test how the custodians, given we've got varieties of types of custodians, how custodians and will interface information and data, and what are the issues that may come up for that. So just to recap, so it is about finalising the BMAs. It is about putting up we will also put up as Dean said, a proof of concept for the proof of absence model, because it's how the information data will be used in a granular way. But we're also looking at utilising the development around more increasing incursions in myrtle rust, because we initially focused on Kodi dieback areas, because we had data and information from there with the initial outset of the research, and also a focus on the 16 areas that scientists and researchers prioritised around Kodi dieback and myrtle rust specifically. So finalising the work, linking it to emergent research and research or information data that's coming out of myrtle rust, and then testing the information and data that's being generated from the research and science as a way of developing the sovereignty and custody digital libraries, repositories, alongside with the granular work of applying the information and data we're getting across the modelling developed by Nari Williams and some of the work that's coming out of Auckland Council with Karen Froud.
Thank you, Wai. I guess just so people can understand the utility of the approach, can you give us an example of who might be custodians in this kind of system?
Go ahead, Wai.
Are you there, Wai?
Well, custodians could be Department of Conservation, it could be Plant and Food Research, Scion, could be community groups, it could be Mana Whenua on the land, just anybody who's out there collecting information or data on the ecosystems, really.
Sorry, Maureen, I had a little bit of a blip with the weather. Can you just, I missed the last bit of your question.
Oh, we were just talking about to help people understand how broadly applicable the approach is, examples of who might be custodians, and Dean's saying, well, it could be, it could be DOC, it could be...
So custodian is anyone, we've been quite pragmatic about that. Initially, we were looking at researchers and scientists because the platform relies on people who want to, they have to actually take the opportunity to share their information and data, but it's anyone that holds information and data. So that's agencies, so Crown agencies, taxonomic collections, botanic gardens, predator-free pest managers, trappers, community using iNaturalist. So the idea around the data collation or centralisation comes from this. We had a before we had a meeting, a workshop with scientists and researchers and agencies pre-COVID. And at that conversation, initially we were looking at vaulting data and information because there seemed to be a big interest in getting all this myrtle rust and Cody dieback information in one place. But once we had the meeting, what was clearly apparent was that people would like information and data shared, but not quite theirs. They want to keep theirs to themselves and have the opportunity to have some controls over it. So the idea around the federated platform allows anyone with information and data to be able to upload that information and data so that where it is open source, it can be synthesized across or interfaced across the platform. So anybody who collects data, uses data, shares data, can use the platform. It will be applicable to them. It's not so much about getting the data, it's about getting the information data to a place where you're able to make better decisions around prioritization of resourcing and funding, prioritization of effort and activity, and prioritization around how you develop management solutions and ultimately even research investment. You have all the data and information in one place. You've got publications loaded there saying what work you've done, what research you've evolved. Then extensions of that research can occur because you're able to have a wider optic on what you have already gathered, as opposed to recreating and duplicating things because we've left a decade and that information's left somewhere else.
Great, Kia ora, thanks, Wai. We've got some really nice, good questions coming through that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get answered in this session, but we will follow up with the team and get answers out to you. I guess I'll just finish with one question. It's about long-term thinking and how might the data infrastructure integrated surveillance model be sustained and governed into the future, noting the need for mana whenua control of their BMA data. And you've got 1 minute to answer.
Wow.
It's a big one in 1 minute.
It was half a minute. So the idea is actually that while information and data is being utilized like this, that it can use in a granular fashion locally and on site. It also can be used in developing something that's predictive, because the data and information then can be coalesced against itself. And then the other way in which this could be developed is looking at standardizing the way in which we share data and also influence the outcomes of that data. In terms of the governance conversation, we have had some very broad conversations around that, and we're keeping ourselves open because we're quite early in the program, and there's been significant interest in who will have authority over that, because ultimately mana whenua will always, within the context of this work, mana whenua will have their own information and data and intelligence that will sit with them, but it's more about the upkeep and control of the platform. The platform doesn't hold the data, it allows the ability to operationalize data.
Thanks, Mai. Good to hear those conversations, early conversations around governance and sustainability of the approach are happening. So I'd just like to thank the team for that great presentation. As I said before, there's a huge amount of interest in this piece of work, and it's really exciting because it's a tricky space, and it's really exciting to see some novel solutions being tackled in this theme. So thank you, team, and to the wider team as well, who I know are not part of the presentation today, but are working really hard in this space. Okay, thank you, and we're going to move on to the last theme today. So the last theme is control, protect, cure, and this theme is another really important one for the Ngārako Takitaki. It brings together research from many different areas. So there's things on work on microbiology, nanotechnology, chemistry, social science, to develop new tools and management strategies and tools for the two pathogens. So it specifically considers whether the tools are going to be used by kauriaki and land managers and research teams. So it's taking into account all those things and thinking about the social and cultural considerations as well when designing the tools and validating them. So by necessity, the teams are cross-disciplinary, and there's a lot of different knowledge holders participating, including mana whenua and land managers. So I'll leave the introduction there because I don't want the team to run out of time, and I've got a great video to share with you. So I'll just hopefully Dave, this theme is led by Dave Milner, who you met earlier. Here he is again, Dave, and Marion Woods, scientist at Plant and Food Research. And I'll let Dave and Marion introduce themselves and the rest of the team. Thanks. Who'd like to start?
You going, Dave?
Kia ora koutou. Okay. Kia ora koutou anō. Ko Dave Milner taku ingoa. I was on the earlier session this morning with Te Whakahononga. Those that may not have seen that, ko Dave Milner taku ingoa. No uri o Ngāti Manu Patuara Kiki, Ngāti Rangi Reporua, Ngāti Pātua, Ngā Hapu. So kia ora, I hail from many hapu iwi, but have spent most of my life at Takaiwai for Patuara Kiki. So I'm the Māori co-lead for this Control, Protect, Cure theme, alongside Marion. Kia ora, Marion.
Kia ora. So I'm Marion Wood. I work at Plant Food Research. I'm actually a research scientist. I still work in the lab, which is very good. My focus is on designing and developing plant pathogen detection systems with the aim of making them deployable, i.e. can we get them out into the field and can people use them? My background is really in the applied science space. So I've worked for a couple of biotech companies, and I guess that does sort of influence in how I look at science. And so I guess within this theme, my aim is to sort of facilitate bringing this science knowledge together and other tools and technologies that are actually being developed within our theme, and hopefully you'll pick that up through the video, and we've got a very short presentation at the end if necessary. But I want to be able to facilitate bringing that science out into the public arena and supporting its uptake and application, and in particular with regards to kauri dieback and metal rust. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Dave and Marion. I think we'll roll the video now, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Well, ngā mihi, Dave and Marion. It was really great to hear how you're feeling about the new way of working in Ngāraku Takitaki, and thanks for sharing that with us. And also just want to acknowledge again Andrea Grant's role in getting this research theme rolling. Now, Dave and Marion, you have a PowerPoint that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think it would probably just follow up on, we sort of waffled on a bit towards the end of that video, and so.
I think that was very, very good to listen to, Dave. We do have some nice questions for you too, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just quickly, succinctly sort of describe one-liners of the research areas and then the questions.
Okay, so if I kick off, I mean, I think one of the things we sort of missed in the presentation is the actual science that we're doing, the different projects. We've got about 9 different projects that are being funded at the moment, and I'll just take you through sequentially from this table. So the first project is what we call an RA1 and 1A, and that's the development of a microfluidic based sensor. So I talked about that in the video, and that involves Professors Jadranka Sujic, Trevor Sujic, and Professor David Williams over at Auckland Uni. And this has been a great opportunity because we've got a young postdoc who's also driving the science. So we're actually engaging with like the next generation of scientists. So and they've just jumped into this work straight away, and we're also aligning with a company down in Christchurch called Infact, who are overseeing the whole process. So when it comes to, and he uses this word, ruggedization, so getting the sensor in a format that is actually useful for out in the field. They're from the very start of the project, they can see how it developed and can impart their knowledge as we develop the sensor. So that's a really, really good combination of skills. And the next one is RA1B. So that's been led by Grant Smith at PFR and Julia Sowato over at Scion. So they're using that knowledge to develop an assay that will allow, they're almost future-proofing for future incursions with myrtle rust. So myrtle rust comes in multiple flavors, and they are developing an assay that will allow them to differentially diagnose the presence of these different myrtle rust pathobars. We have the next project, which is RA2, and we talked a lot about that in the video, and it's about the sterilants or the decontamination processes that need to be in place. So, you know, like I say, you can detect the organisms, but unless you have a strategy for dealing with them, then detection is almost useless at that point. So there's a lot of emphasis on developing or identifying alternative sterilants, and also feeding into strategies, for example, that DOC may want to utilize for field workers. And then over to you, Dave.
Kia ora. So RA3A and RA3B are the Tauranga projects, or a couple of them. And so looking at Tauranga bioactives, what are the active ingredients in rongoa species that might actually make a difference to our kauri? So there's been some work already done, I think I mentioned in the video already, that we're advancing through our RA3 project. So just looking further around advancing research that's already been done, and including mana whenua, because they may have other rongoa species that they may like to investigate. RA3B is really the cultural monitoring framework that was detailed in the video as well, and that monitoring, we need to be able to monitor any of the research that's going on in our rohe. And so if we had a consistent monitoring framework that we could apply wherever the research is happening, and whatever the research is, we'll be able to get some consistent data of what's happening. Is it changing for the better or worse, or at all? So we need to be able to have some clear monitoring that we can apply for management in the future. So that's RA3B, Cultural Monitoring Framework. We've also got, in our next slide, RA4, which is Te Whakahononga. So we had that session earlier this morning on Te Whakahononga to describe what it's about. We've also, every theme has mentioned it throughout the day. So I don't think I need to go further into that, but it's just really a culture shift into what does it look like working with mana whenua appropriately and acknowledging the taonga. Right. Seeded scope 1. I was going to pass that back to Marion.
Kia ora. Okay, so Seed and Scope 1, that was Julie Dislet down at Victoria University. So she's actually completed the first round of this research, and they were looking at the cellular components, the fatty acids within the cell membranes of Phytophthora, and using that as a way of asking the question, can they identify at the species level different varieties of Phytophthora in soil-based samples. So at the moment they've got it as far as the genus level, so they haven't got the specificity yet, but they have developed strategies that they hope will take it to that species level. And they've published quite recently on that work, so that was a nice piece of work. And then we've got the small investment. So this is the monitoring of the phosphate treatment, and that's with Kauri Rescue Project, and that is to enable them and facilitate them to continue on with their work and actually pull the data together. So there's a lot of cleaning up of data, and also the aim is to get the results out into the public arena. And one thing that we haven't included on this slide, but it's pertinent now, is as this is the end of the first year, Andrea Grant's going to pick up a social project within this framework, and Andrea, if you want to contribute to this, at the moment we haven't, or she hasn't decided exactly what direction it's going to go in, but she's going to have a look at the strategies that we're employing within this theme and look at the bigger holistic picture and see where there is an area of research that is basically missing any input, and hopefully she'll be able to fill that. So that will bring in our social science aspect as well. But Andrea's had that social science lens all the way through the development of this project. So that's been really good, because like Dave says, there's 3 individuals that have come together and we all have a different lens that have actually helped direct and drive this project. Cool. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. Okay, well, I've got some interesting questions here, and we'll get through as many as we can. So I think this is a question for both of you, and you both touched on it in your presentation, but how do you ensure the integration, or we won't use the integration word, but the combining of knowledge, worldviews and values, and what approaches are used as researchers and as a team to bring these 2 knowledge systems together, I suppose? So you in your video, you sound like you're working really well as a team now. And so what's the key to that and to the progress that you're making? And also, part B, how valuable and powerful is this dual knowledge approach?
Well, I can make a start at it. I'll stab. For me, it's been very powerful because I, like I say, I'm a wet lab scientist. I, tend to keep my head down, do the work. I have found, and it's not just with Dave's input, but like I say, it's also with Andrea's input, is having these multiple lenses that allow you to look at a problem in so many different ways and come up with, multiple solutions that eventually seem to coalesce into one forward-going solution. And the beauty of that is that you're addressing all these issues as you're going along. You don't get to the end and go, oh gosh, I didn't think about that. Oh, and I didn't think about that. So it's an ongoing iterative process that we're going through. And I guess we all have outreaches to other communities that we also bring into the conversation as well.
Thanks, Marion. Dave?
It is a challenge actually with the different the different knowledge bases. So science, facts, you know, versus mātauranga and Māoritanga as in having faith in some things. So the tangible and intangible. And how do they come together? Well, I guess if we talk about a Whakahou, there's a lot of science that happens in that particular hull. And then there's mātauranga and karakia and wairua that sits in the mātauranga hull. So some just don't come together, but there's a lot that can. And so I guess that sort of helps manage, you know, what kind of outcomes come through, how is it respected, and so that's just taking each party on the journey of learning for the Western Science hull, how much they can adopt and you know, from the Mātauranga hull and vice versa. But actually your role is here and you do that well and you do it great and continue to do that, and just honouring the same in the other hull. So it's a journey.
Yeah. And I think it's also about evolving a common language as well. So, you know, if we learn to speak in a manner that we both understand, it really helps the process. It helps the journey forward.
Thank you. There's a few questions around plans for validation of the tools. So who will you work with to do that?
So me, I'm happy to talk first. So the validation tools will initially be validated in-house. So we obviously want to get to a point before we are comfortable with reaching out and asking people to validate, but we've approached the various iwis. They've shown interest in several of the projects as well. So, you know, literally it's anyone who feels that they could add value. We've approached DOC, we've approached SARM, we've approached Plant and Food. You know, we are open to this because we think these tools could have different applications in different environments as well.
And so just in support of that, the lab stuff is valid, that's part of the validation. Recognising that you may need to get samples of taonga, whether it's soil samples or leaf samples or seed samples or taonga sampling, then there needs to be a discussion had with mana whenua, and so that's kind of what's been happening currently around developing the science proposals and research programs, and also developing the engagement with mana whenua and how that's done through Te Whakahononga, through cultural authority agreements, and anchoring those in the program going forward.
Yeah, and that's all being done up front. That's not hindsight.
So when it's time to actually apply something out in the field, the relationships are already there. There's a framework on how we're going to measure that, monitor it. So once that's ready to go out in the field, and in some cases it already is, there's no challenges.
So I guess related to that is Bill Dix said thanks for the interesting presentation, Dave and Marion, and he's interested in if there's any intention at this point to scale up Monica's exciting bioactive work and put some promising bioactives through a production line, for example.
Kia ora, Bill. That's the proper question coming from you, as we know. So, Bill, yeah, look, I think as things progress, you know, to scale something out to support our rākau will be the outcome. So, you know, if there are promising results to date, we need to, you know, validate that in the field. So there's some mana whenua relationships established. We're looking at spreading that out to the other 16 mana whenua. so that we can get geographical sort of validation as well, and then see what kind of scale can be rolled out if everything goes according to plan.
Okay, kia ora. This next one probably applies to lots of the speakers today. I'll just skip the introduction to it, but New Zealand's too small not to have good monitoring systems, and we all know this, and it needs to get done. But the question is, how do we, science practitioners and kaitiaki, get together to lobby government to invest in baselines and continuous monitoring? It's a great question.
I guess we might be seeing a model roll out in the MPS for freshwater management alongside like with Te Mana o Te Wai. There's a responsibility to identify what, so for the, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, there are key attributes that councils need to apply for monitoring the health and well-being of water bodies. There's a Te Mana o Te Wai component of that, and you know, for example, in that space, what does mahinga kai mean? Is the mahinga kai healthy? What species are there? Are they healthy? Are they abundant as they were a generation or two ago? So there is baseline monitoring programs. Originally were based on science, of course, but now there's a mātauranga component coming through in that area. That's one example that might actually really help anchor a dual monitoring program going forward. We could apply similar things with this May.
Okay, and one of the things I'd like to put in is that I think we need to identify some almost like social influencers, you know, the equivalent of Susie Wiles for plant pathogens, someone who has a voice, someone who has a presence, someone who is readily identified with this, but specific to New Zealand. So, you know, we've had these discussions in our own small team, but I do think there's some value in that, you know, given, because to me it's almost transgenerational at that point as well. Kids listen to Susie, adults listen to Susie, so yeah.
Tora, thank you. Well, thanks team. I'm going to have to bring this session to an end. So that's the last of the research themes within the protect impact area, and I just want to thank all the teams that presented today for showcasing the breadth of the work that's underway and the extent of engagement that has been going in both with mana whenua and across the science system. So we've got some really good teams built, ready to roll out the research. And as Marion said at the end of her video, our door is always open, so please feel free to contact any of the co-leads if you feel you have work that is aligned or you feel like.
Oh, kia ora. I'm hoping that everyone's back now and they can hear me. And I really loved that last session. As you can see, there's a lot of work going on and there is plenty of pressure to get stuff done in the next 2 years, and you can certainly feel it in the teams when they're talking about the urgency that they're feeling, but also the excitement they have. And before we kick into session 3, Whakahou, Restore, I just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things as we do. I wanted to just acknowledge again Naraki and her team at Kirero Films for the videos, and remind people that those will be available online later. We will send an email out to let you know when they've been uploaded to our website. They may change between now and when they're uploaded, so please do go back and have a look at them. There will be some tweaking to some of them potentially, and of course there will be the Te Whakahononga one uploaded. Gosh, I also wanted to acknowledge, in case I don't get time at the end of this, the support team who have been behind the scenes trying to keep us moving, and have done all the prep work to get Nick, Maureen, Daniel and I organised and on here. You can see Nick. And of course the ELG team, importantly thank Daniel, Maureen and Nick, who have been doing a great job emceeing, chairing and the like. Just a couple of other things as well in case I don't get to talk to you at the end, in case you have to run off because we're running late. Again, as we said, the videos will be available later. Please sign up to our newsletter as well. It's a really good way to know what's happening and also to get access to things like the videos, and acknowledging again Ngā Riki for allowing participants of the summit to see the director's cut of her Te Wānui film. And so you have access to that for a very limited time, and we suggest that you do watch it. A lot of what's discussed in that film has led to how it inspires these researchers and why they invest in what they do. Also, just a reminder that a summit evaluation will be sent out in the next couple of days. Please complete it. It helps us decide how we're going to run the summit, hopefully when COVID's gone next year or the year after. And also, finally, I just want to let you know that we are attempting to get through the questions. So I know we're not getting them all to the teams, but we will share them with the teams and get answers either out to you directly or shared on our website or on our Facebook or some way to get ensure that everyone gets answers to those questions. But right now, I want to hand over to our other co-lead of Ngā Rākau Taki, Dr. Nick Waipara. Nick, I always say, probably embarrassingly for you, Nick, though, I always say Nick's Mr. Cody. There isn't a conversation or a research project or a community project that Nick hasn't had a hand in or doesn't know about or hasn't supported in some ways. So again, we couldn't have had a Ngā Rākau Taki program without having Nick there. So I'm going to hand over to Nick and get you to lead us through our final session, Whakahou Restore. Kia ora, Nick.
Oh, kia ora, Mel. I have put the lights down so I won't turn red. Good, that cordial. Nā mai haere mai, welcome back to the last part of the afternoon. We're going to have to cruise through really quickly because we're already up against it. But session 3, Whakahou Restore, is about giving hope, giving a restoration, and we've got 2 themes, theme 6 and theme 7. But a reflection when I was listening to all the kōrero today, when I first started working on this ngārara, the Kauri dieback, it was described as that strange fungus-like thing that no one knew what to call it. And eventually it got a tag name called PTA. And so listening today, I just really have been reminded how far we've come since those early days. So kia ora to all the speakers today and the researchers that have contributed to where we are. So no mai haere mai, and let's get to it. So theme 6 is fondly known by the Ngā Rākau Taki whānau as HPE, or host pathogen environment, and it's looking at the role of that environmental factors play on the disease expression and severity. And it's investigating also, everyone knows what a genome is now, don't they? Hashtag COVID-19 sequencing. But I'm not going to be doing the kōrero. I'm going to introduce the fabulous and wonderful co-leads of HPE, Julianne Cheetham and Becky Ganley. So I would welcome them and nā mai haere mai to give the kōrero about your wonderful mahi. Welcome.
Kia ora, Nick. Kia ora tātou. I did introduce myself earlier, but ko Julianne Cheetham tōku ingoa no whāngarei ahau. A bit like Nick, I'm also mainly a Kauri person. Have been involved in the Kauri dieback space for about a decade now, and really grateful to have the opportunity to be working in this space in Ngā Rākau Taki with Becky, who will introduce herself in a second. But yeah, so we've already discussed Te Whakahononga earlier on, and this space is a really host pathogen and environment is a awesome kaupapa for mana whenua, particularly because we're getting to the point where we can now address the environment. A lot of the kōrero over the past decade in the Kauri dieback space at least has been, a focus on a pathogen, a focus on matters in isolation and not looking at the Ngāhere as a whole. So that's why this is a really exciting program for me to be involved in. I'm really really keen on that kaupapa. So kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Biki Ganley taku inā, e mahi ana ahau ki te rangahau aha marakai ki te poki. So welcome everyone. I'm Becky Ganley. I'm a pathologist at Plant and Food Research, which as Juliana said, I'm a co-lead with herself. Also agree with everything Juliana said, and just also from behalf of us want to acknowledge the wider research team that we work with, in particular our RA leaders, Nari Williams, Rob Beresford, Rosie Bradshaw and Grant Smith. So yeah, a lot of exciting work going on by the teams within this program.
Oh, kia ora kōrua. So in this part, for some of the people that haven't have just joined us, because there's been people coming and going, I've been watching the ducking ins and outs. So to remind people, or welcome no mai haere mai if you've just joined for the most wonderful part of the Kauriland Summit, is that if you have questions along the way for anything that you hear or you seek further clarification, you can put them in the questions and we will ensure that we'll get to that. Hopefully, if we have time, there'll be that Q&A at the end and we'll be seeing a video in between. So if we don't get to your questions, we'll be looking at them really hard as everyone speaks. Don't worry, we will get back to you, as they say, and we do. So also, I've got a note here to remind the panelists not presenting to turn cameras and microphones off, and that includes me. Okay, kia ora and welcome. And theme 6 is a really, I was looking at the array of projects and mahi underway, and I don't know how you're going to get through it. It's really quite impressive. So I'm not going to do any of that explanation. I'm going to leave it to your wonderful selves.
Were we having a video?
Yeah, we're just going to wait, Philip.
Okay.
It was playing in the break.
Oh, cool.
Now, Mihi, kia ora kōrua. That was a fantastic wrap-up of your theme. And what I was reflecting when you were both speaking, that the, yeah, that's just really these little, if only we'd had the same sort of language that we've had for managing COVID as when we started, Julianne, when even the word spore scared people. So, I mean, there are some silver linings to COVID, isn't there? Everyone's an armchair microbiologist and an armchair epidemiologist. While that film's been playing, I've been looking at the questions, and it's a hot question, action-filled spreadsheet there. And I think some of the questions, I'm not sure if you want to introduce some of the team members, because there may be some of the questions there that some may want to comment on, or just a brief introduction of your team. And that's not on the run sheet, but I've been looking at the questions and I'm going, oh, there might be some people that are lurking in behind that might want to add.
Yeah, I suppose the key ones for the team, I won't go through everyone because I'm sure to miss people off, but as I said, the RA leaders, we've got Nari Williams, Rob Beresford and Rosie Bradshaw and Grant Smith. And so each of them are leading quite diverse teams across multiple organisations. We've got students and postdocs who sit within the program as well. Yes, so it's quite a diverse group of researchers.
Yeah, and you've got a diverse range of questions, and I've been told to get on with them. And Mihi Peter Buchanan from Manaki Whenua. Peter, I used to work for Peter, but also ngā mihi to Peter and the team at Manaki Whenua, because of course Ross Beaver, the late Ross Beaver, who I guess discovered and brought various aspects of Agathidisa or Kauri dieback together originally. And Peter's got some great questions there. So I'm going to pick one of them, which is, do we understand the infection process of Phytophthora agathidicida, i.e. Kauri dieback, on roots at the same level of detail as our understanding of myrtle rust infection on leaves? That's a gnarly one, isn't it?
Yeah, that is pretty good. I will give it a slight stab. I've got Nari there as a panelist. She might want to step in. And I don't have Rob here, but I can speak with the myrtle rust. I suppose they're different in the sense that even though we've only had myrtle rust in New Zealand for a short period of time, there's a lot of knowledge that sits behind it, and it's a been disease that's causing issues. It's been known since the late 1800s, so it's not new to science, whereas we know with Phytophthora agathidicida Kauri dieback, it's a new to science species. So we're looking at very, very different timeframes, and we're also how it infects can be with myrtle rust. I'd say we do have more information on it, but some of that is because we're just bringing over that knowledge that's from other countries, and we're checking to see whether it's the same as what we have in New Zealand. And then Nari, I'll pass you over to just to make some comment about the infection process around Kauri dieback. Can't hear you, Nari.
You're muted.
And here you are. Oh, welcome, Nari.
No worries. Yep, thanks for throwing the hot potato my way, Becky. We have done a reasonable amount of work looking at the infection process for Phytophthora agathidicida. Stan Belgard led some really nice microscopy work looking at infection from the root tips and the progression of the pathogen up through the fine roots. So yeah, I guess we've got a bit of an understanding there, but of course when everything's happening below ground, it's a bit hard to track it in real time and to see those natural processes. So yeah, I guess it's all happening at the root tips basically.
Kia ora, Nari. And part of the film also mentioned the Healthy Trees, Healthy Future program and the work and the mahi that you did at Scion and the team there. So it's really nice to see continuity of experts like yourself weaving through into NRT. So kia ora, Nari. I'm going to
and also to the team at Scion there, Nick. It's good to see that picking up too.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be democratic for once and say we're going to move on to the next question that I can see. Kia ora. What do we know about the northern rata, juvenile or mature, as a host for myrtle rust in the Ngāhere? Kia ora, Julie, for that.
Yeah, don't know specifically how much infection's been recorded on it. A lot of the issue that we have at the moment, and this was touched on earlier in some of the other sessions, is the need for national monitoring. So there's not a lot of information coming through because we don't have any centralised or national system where we're gathering that kind of information. So we do have information on what species are susceptible in New Zealand, how it's happening across all the species. We don't know, and so anything, however, the comment previously about how can we lobby the government to fund some form of monitoring that's regular and ongoing, fully support that, and it would make being able to answer that, or we would be able to answer that question. At the moment, if people are going out, it's fragmented, the information's not coming across sort of on a national wide position to pass through that information. So yeah, it is quite limited.
I think that, sorry, Nick, I was just going to say, I think that some of the BMAs that we're going to be working with in the program I think they do fall into areas where potentially surveillance and monitoring of northern rata could potentially be part of their tohu and surveillance work. So, you know, there's a hopefully that's something that is going to be picked up through some of the mana whenua rohe work going forward.
Kia ora. The last question we have time for relates to what the previous question was around the host range and specificity, which it doesn't really have, of myrtle rust to Kauri dieback. And that's been a bone of contention for many years because it has sort of had an ad hoc timeline about stop-start. But the question was, where is that at? And it is included in this thing, isn't it?
I'm not sure. Are you meaning what the host range of Kauri dieback is?
Just Kauri dieback, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, some of it, Nari, I might call you back on because you're probably best placed to speak about some of this. And there's two streams. So what's happening within Naraka Taki and this theme in particular is we're looking at the influence of other phytophoras and how they might contribute to disease. But I'll leave Nari to answer the part about the host range.
Yeah, so there's a collaborative project.
Oh, sorry, go. Before you start, there was also the MPI program, isn't there?
Yeah. So I was just about to comment to that there's a collaborative project between Scion and Plant and Food looking at some of the native species that are potential hosts for Phytophthora agathodicida. And then also Lauren Waller, based down at Lincoln, is looking at a broader range of species, many of which are the invasive weeds that could also be behaving as a host. So yeah, the MPI project is 1 year in to a 3-year program, and we're looking at whether or not plants planted out get infected or not. I would say in general, we're not seeing any really striking hosts, but the limited number of species that have been screened thus far is means that that's very preliminary and will be coming through in the next couple of years. But it's very, very important information.
Kia ora, Nari. Thanks for joining us, because that's some of the critical questions that are still coming through now. But unfortunately, we have to wrap that up. And but for people who still want to ask questions around this, please do keep putting them into the questions chat. I also point you to the challenge Naraka Taki website. So remember, there is actually information online and you can connect that way. So kia ora, Julianne, kia ora, Becky, thank you. And thank you to you and the team for a wonderful introduction to your mahi. And I also want to acknowledge the risk assessment and ecosystem impact team of Lookout and Simon and Tracy, who you heard earlier, and their work with you on that research as well. So kia ora. And I do apologise to everyone who did put questions in the chat, but they're keeping going. So we're going to come to the last theme today, theme 7, as we love to call it, conservation and restoration. This theme is ensuring susceptible plant species survive myrtle rust and Kauri dieback by helping prevent the extinction of these iconic species and protecting at-risk species and the ecosystem that they contribute. And of course, our taonga rākau, or trees, in many locations across the motu. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the two co-leads, Peter Bellingham and Albie Marsh, to pop in and introduce themselves. Nau mai haere mai. Peter, Albie. Peter, welcome. I knew you were there somewhere. Welcome. Kare. Albie. We can't hear.
Kia ora.
Albie.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Welcome back. We saw you earlier in the morning.
Kia ora. Yeah. What do we do? Introducing ourselves.
Peter can speak now too. Yes. Welcome to the last part of the afternoon.
I'll start by introducing myself again. So, kia ora tātou anō. Ke awi mās tōku ingo e mahi ana hau ki te rangahau ahamara kai ki te papai o ia. So I'm with Plant and Food Research and based in Palmerston North. He uria hau no taranga moana me ngā tihine me ngā pui. So I hail from the north and the Bay of Plenty, Waiariki. And I'm a co-lead in conservation restoration, and I'll let Peter introduce himself now. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko Tom Waits aho. No, I've got a bad throat. It's called Peter Bellingham, tōko ingoa. I'm from Manaki Whenua at Lincoln. I'm a forest ecologist. We're both going to be talking quite a lot over the next little while, so I'll keep it brief here. But there's one thing I really do want to tautoko. When people talk about the need for baselines and continual monitoring, I think that's music to my ears. It's nothing I haven't been saying for most of my career. And it is really striking the unwillingness of both central and local government agencies to commit to long-term monitoring programs. In Aotearoa, we're no strangers to the value of long-term monitoring of populations. Our longitudinal study of human health from the University of Otago is world-leading, and we might ask ourselves why we don't invest the same in our unique environment. When it comes to our rako, 95% of our trees occur nowhere else, so if we don't do it, nobody else can teach us. Enough said.
Tautoko. It is one of the areas that has been neglected in a lot of parts of our ecosystems, and when the response to Kauri dieback began, there was a sort of a review of where there was long-term monitoring plots, or even the NIVs, the National Vegetation Surveys, within the Kauri forest, and there were very few. So, you know, we were always on the back foot. So you raise a really good point. But anyway.
Guess how many of them have been remeasured since that was identified? None.
None. So long-term monitoring, it's the, yeah. But anyway, I would really like to hear what you have to say on the film clips, because they've all been wonderful, but they've all been really long in terms of they haven't edited it to the point where we have to be really quick. So
ours is very long.
Yes, so that's why I'm, without further ado, rushing us along a little bit. It's not that I want to leave the building, but I'm on a very strict timeline, and I can see that these videos are really treasures and taonga in themselves, especially the corridor that you've given to us. And yeah, so we'll just wait for them to load. If we're a commercial television. Wow, I just again tautoko what Mel said earlier about Nāriki at who's filmed that as well. That's fantastic. And Mel also said about that this is an iterative journey. So in subsequent years, the story of conservation, restoration, and mahi that you've brought together will be adding to what we just saw. So kia ora. Kia ora kōrero for that corridor. There's so many questions, I'm just blown away. I can't think, gosh, and some of them are really long. So my reflections on that are where do you see the theme going? Put it back on you in terms of where the rubber hits the road. You mentioned your connections in the north, Taitokoro, but myrtle rust is down in Te Waiponamu now, so it's a huge place and space to get around Aotearoa and the rust has moved in all sorts of corners.
My response to that, we can only do what we can do, Nick. I think if we're setting templates for what might be processes for protection, that's the best I can hope for, but it's already confounded our expectations about where might be climatically safe. It's shown up in Ōtautahi, which was regarded as a safe zone. So we're already at the stage of needing to rethink the whāngai process. But again, what's acceptable there? That's a matter for discussion. I think all we're finding is that the what I referred to as triage is getting ramped up all the while as we learn about what's happening to the spread of myrtle rust within Aotearoa.
Yes.
There was a reason that we focused on a species as rare as rata moeho. I mean, of course, that's principally that it could be kaupapa Māori led, and I'm absolutely glad that that is so. But if, as I said, if ever there was a species that needed triage, that is one. But I think ramarama may be moving rather rapidly into that zone as well.
Well, particularly I was looking at the Facebook post and the film and the mahi of Graham Atkins and Fiona and Ngāti Pro, and it was I had followed their monitoring, but I was just absolutely devastated with seeing it brought together in a film in the Mobilising for Action mahi in the weekend. It's just, yeah, I was speechless when you see it like that. These questions are so huge. And Barry Scott has said, and we love Barry Scott from Palmerston North, when do we get to see all the questions that were posted? So we will, and then he left. So we will definitely get to all of them because there's quite a diversity there. Yeah, no, I really should. They're very good. Oh gosh, it's Ko-Whai. Yeah, no, I think I'm going to just say Pakatauki. E hara takutoa e te toa takatahi e naere he toa takatini. The success and the work of one is really not going to be what brings Ngā Rākau together. It's going to be the work of the many. And what I saw today, just from all 7 themes, was exactly that. Kaupapa Māori research from across the motu. I've really been, yeah, it is the work of many that is going to create NRT's impact that we so need. I just really have to say thank you to you both for your importance of the work. The sea conservation area is is very important. I've been noting, Peter, and I remember at one of the Myrtle Rust Symposium that NPI had brought together around the lack of knowledge around seed curation, seed biology, how do we preserve these taonga, and that basic gap in what we should have known already, again, has exposed itself the same way as we need very little of the Kodi dieback soil ecosystem. So, it's, yeah.
Oh, kia ora, Nick. I think if there's one thing we should learn from our experience of myrtle rust, don't wait a decade. You don't have a decade to wait. If we could turn back time, of course, we'd have invested in many of the things that we needed to about myrtle rust some time ago. We need just as well to be mindful of the pathogens that are waiting in the wings. It is a question, I believe, of not if but when rapid ōhia dieback reaches Aotearoa, and its effects on taonga like Poirikawa will be utterly devastating compared with those of myrtle rust.
Yes, and that brings us to the point of the impact of Ngā Rākau Takitaki. We'll be preparing Aotearoa for the ongoing incursions, and you mentioned rapid ōhia death Ceratocystis in Hawaii at the moment, and I mean these incursions are going to continue. So I think it really has shown the importance and the priority around research in our taonga, and you know, before these incursions happen. But
I'm really glad that Tracy, for example, is taking an explicit view of incursions that are waiting in the wings.
And that's where interlinking with the biosecurity mahi across in the in the wider biological heritage challenge project. So I'll put a plug in for the other part of the science that is happening at the moment as well. Plus, within Ngā Rākau Takitaki, I think it's going to be some good connections around that. And I have to apologise to Kwasi from Scion. Your questions are so big I can't read them. I think it's showing I need glasses, but the box is not. I really can't see it.
Hi Nick, I'm jumping in because I know that we're going to wrap up soon, but I want to ensure that Pete and Albie have time to maybe close out. I'm sure Albie's probably got a comment, and so does Pete. Maybe their eyes can see the question too, Nick. Albie or Pete, do you want to give some comments? I can ask those questions as well if you want.
Knock yourself out, Mel. I can't read them.
I can't read them. Sorry.
Yeah, Albie, have you got
Go, Mel.
Yeah, so that says, Peter, that you've mentioned myrtle rust, cryogenic, etc. So the question is in line with that statement. Talking about seed conservation for our taonga, I wish to find out the operational way of keeping infected trees, native plants alive to be able to produce enough seeds. Speaking of cryogenics, there is no plant material. If there is no plant material, there is nothing. I.e. seeds or other tissues for embryogenics to grow under tissue culture methods. So do we just watch our iconic plants die? Do we just do monitoring, counting infected plants? It's kind of certainly not enough when we're revisiting operational tools to control myrtle rust. So to date, since incursion, there is no operational method of controlling the pathogen for short term, whilst looking forward to long-term methods. So I guess it's a question around the cryogenics and you know, what are some of your thoughts around that? I guess processes work.
Well, I'll defer to my learned colleague Albie because this isn't my background area. But all I can say is that this is truly triage material. In areas such as the area of Ramarama that was infected, we don't even know whether the efficacy of any treatment against myrtle rust might boost flowering and fruiting. And if it does, are the pollinator communities affected by the application of the treatment against myrtle rust? These are questions I can't answer you, but it could get that bad. It certainly does suggest that if there are possibilities of safe zones to apply the whāngai process that Albie is advocating for, we should move rapidly to do so while we've still got time, but prepare ourselves for the fact that even our best guesses at climate forecast change may confound us.
Whoever asked the question is entirely correct. To have something to preserve, you've got to have material in which to be able to do so with. So I suppose what we should be looking for is material that is uninfected currently whilst we have the time. And we should be sending people out there to, you know, try and identify and, well, locate and identify some of those at threat species like the Ramarama rohutu and Mairi tawake. So that should be one of our first activities that we undertake in this program. We have been doing quite a lot of that over the last summer. Collecting seed and looking at how we can preserve them, well, looking at methods for preservation, but also seeing if they're at the end of a short period, seeing if they would germinate again. So that testing will continue as long as we do have material to work on.
Kia ora. I also want to ask Mel to chip in here about the contribution from the Oranga theme about sovereignty of whose seed, whose flowers, whose material, and how to safeguard it.
Oh, I think I've said enough, Peter, but yeah, it's really great to have Oranga and conservation restoration linked in this space. So obviously, you know, while you're doing some of the technical aspects about how we can preserve and what we can preserve, we're obviously thinking about that from a sovereignty perspective and who has ownership of it, who has access to material. And again, like we said in our video, one of our concerns is the current policies and regulations under which we store and under which we conserve, which mean that the depositor has the rights. And so part of the conversation for us is around how do we have, you know, multiple depositors to ensure that everyone's rights are covered around protecting our taonga species. So there's some really cool work going on that we hope to share with the wider Ngā Rākau Takitaki whānau very, very soon. So thanks for that, Peter. And I wonder if that's a really good place to end it for now. Is that okay, Nick, if I intervene and thank on your behalf the amazing conservation restoration team of Albie and Peter and their wider support team. There are a number of questions there that I'm going to forward to Peter and Albie. Well, we're going to. I note that we didn't get to Peter's questions, and hopefully we'll get you guys to respond to them as well. So thank you very much for your time and for your very comprehensive video. And I also want to thank Nick for chairing the session. As he said, he had the big videos, but that's because there are actually two areas. Let's acknowledge that there are two areas where we as Ngā Rākau Takitaki leaders were adamant we had to have increased investment compared to what we've seen over the last 10 years. They're both areas that are really, really important. Not that the other things aren't important, but these were two areas that we were adamant needed to have more investment. Host pathogen in particular because of the work we needed done in Murorus, and conservation and restoration because of that holistic view we wanted over the whole system to ensure that we were thinking about how the diseases were operating in the system, but also what the wider ecosystem needed to respond. So thank you again, gentlemen. And I guess I get to wrap up now. You can disappear if you want, and I get to wrap up by just doing some concluding remarks, which are again what I said at the very beginning, thanking people who helped pull the summit together. So again, I want to thank Nāriki, our producer, director, and her team at Akariro Film. I need to thank Chris McBride and his team at Cody Project for sharing with us the Cody artworks that we saw during the break. I need to thank the support team behind the scenes who have spent many, many weeks pulling together the technology, sharing the summit registration, ensuring that everyone had up-to-date information, even if they weren't getting up-to-date information from Daniel and I. Of course, I need to thank our executive leadership group at the challenge and my co-director, Daniel, for doing the peer review and assessment behind the scenes, making sure we had a program organised. Of course, I need to thank the co-leads and all of the researchers in Ngā Rākau Takitaki. It is a really hard journey because everyone in this space is passionate and everyone wants to be here. It does mean that we do a lot of work late at nights and in the weekends. So I just need to thank you all for putting up with us, starting early this morning to make sure that we could try and get this technology working. Apologies for the glitches. We did have some wild weather today. So in Canterbury here, we've just had a big hailstorm come through. I'm sure in other places you've had some wild weather as well. So apologies for the glitches. Videos will be online again soon. We want to share them with our Ngā Rākau Takitaki whānau, and that's all of our stakeholders, regional councils, ministries, industry groups. We want to share this as far as wide as possible. I want to close, before I hand over to you, Albie, I'm giving you a warning that you're doing our karakia to close. I want to close by acknowledging those mana whenua of Cody lands. Now, we've talked about Cody and Myrtle, but this summit is called the Kauriland Summit, and it's in recognition of the fact that we want to work differently in the research space, but particularly how we work with mana whenua. And so I want to close by thanking in particular our mana whenua, our kaitiaki, our kaumātua, all of those protectors of Cody lands who this summit was actually designed for. We want to share the information about what we're trying to do, what we're attempting to do, and as Nick said, this is a journey. This is the very beginning. We're giving you a heads up of what our thinking is, what we've chosen to invest in and why, and hopefully when you come back and see us again next year, you'll see some progression and some huge progression and some outcomes, and hopefully we'll have some really exciting science to share with you. So kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, and I'm going to hand over to you, Albie, to close us out. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mel, and I'm jumping in before Albie jumps in to say ngā mihi, Mel, to you, because yeah, you're still in Oranga. It's like the Hotel California working in this area. You can never leave. But I want to personally thank you, ngā mihi, for all your mahi, the vision around the summit. This has been your journey and your hard mahi to get us to where we are, and you saw where we needed to go and you took us there, so kia ora. And I just want to recognise all your amazing mahi and just yourself and who you are. Kia ora, ngā mihi. And now you can go, Albie.
Nothing left to say now. So, kia ora tātou. He karakia whakamutunga. Me ino i tātou. E te atua anei mātou e pununga. Whakawhetai atu nei ki a koe. Ngā manaakitanga ki a mātou i roto i ngā kōrero i pāna ki tēnei o tō tātou mahi, te mahi o ngā rākau takitaki. Homai tēnei rangi o tātou i roto i tēnei o tō tātou hui huinga. Nō reira e te atua kaha rawa ku ihu karaiti tō mātou āriki. Āmene. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa te ato whao tō tātou āriki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Āke, āke, āke. Āmene. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Albie. Kia ora koutou.